Thursday, 27th of March open, and in doing so can I remind all councillors and staff this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be available on the Regional Council website at the conclusion of the meeting. Can I further remind you and all those present that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in the court of law and deemed to be slanderous. That's opening comments. Can I ask Ms. Councillor Thurston for a karakia, please?
Colleagues, please be upstanding. Councillor White, we see you on Zoom there today. You shouldn't be. No doubt you'll get a smack shortly from the chairman, but for being with us. But our thoughts are with you for a very speedy recovery, and that comes most sincerely from all your colleagues. Almighty God, we ask that you give us wisdom in the decisions we make here today and give us guidance in working with our regional communities to promote their social, economic, environment and cultural well-being. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. As Councillor Thurston says, the next agenda item is apologies. So we have apologies from Councillor Scott. We have councillors attending by Zoom. We have Councillor Thompson, Councillor Eatey and Councillor White. Whilst you're on Zoom, please feel free to exit the Zoom recording of this meeting at any time. You need to look after your health first and foremost. I'll move the apologies be adopted from Councillor Scott, seconded Councillor Von Duddleston. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Public forum, there is no public forum. Items not on the agenda are no new items to be added to the agenda. Order of business, can we note that 9.12 Quayside Holdings will start at 11 a.m. So the agenda will be rearranged to accommodate that. Declaration of conflicts of interest.
Chair, 9.12 and 9.13 to do a Quayside.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby. And similarly, I'll take an apology, a conflict of interest from Councillor White. Public excluded business be transferred into the open. There are none. Takes us right through the minutes. So can we deal with the minutes? Regional Council minutes is 13th of February, 13th of March. I'll take them collectively. Councillor Nees. Moved. Councillor Winters. True and correct. Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleston. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Any matters arising? No matters arising? Right, that takes us through to the Chair's report. So I'll move the adoption of the Chair's report. Are there any questions in relation to the Chair's report?
Second.
Seconded. Councillor Winters. No questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. 9.2. 9.2 is the appointment of Strategy and Policy Committee Chairperson. This follows the resignation from that chair by Councillor Paula Thompson, who gave notice at the last council meeting or strategy policy meeting. So on my recommendation, I'd like to recommend that Councillor Catt, who is currently the deputy chair, adopts the chair. It makes sense that there's an orderly transition. We only have another 5 months to go for this triennium. And similarly, in order to give Councillor McMillan that support, I'm going to recommend that Councillor Jane Nees takes the position of deputy chair for the rest of the triennium.
Second.
Moved. Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Second. Second. Councillor Shirley. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Well done, Councillor McMillan. Councillor Nees. 9.3, order of candidate names on voting documents. So we're now on page 36 for the 2025 local authority triennial elections. Mr. Groom.
Thank you, Chair. Morena councillors. This paper, and thanks to Torna for preparing this paper, legislation allows you to pick between 3 options for the order that names appear on ballots for the 2025 local election, alphabetical, which is self-explanatory, pseudo-random. I knew I was going to struggle with that word. which effectively is a random order, but it appears in the same order on every ballot, and random, which is every ballot has a different order of names upon it. The paper outlines the kind of respective merits and cons of each of those options, and there's no cost differential between any of those options for us in producing the ballots. Just one thing to note that isn't in the paper, because it's happened subsequently, Opotiki has made a determination that they'll go alphabetical. None of the other TAs in our region have yet made decisions on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And note that the options that were undertaken in 19 and 22 were the random order of surname.
Random, that's correct.
Councillor Von Duddleston.
Yeah, look, I'd like. The history has, for the last 15, 20 years, we've always gone random. And I see no reason to change. We could go alphabetical as long as you reverse it, would be suitable for me. But I don't think that's probably an option that the government's giving us. So I'm going to speak highly in favour of random. It takes away any impression of unfairness. Whether there is, I read your paper saying that it's the evidence is limited on that. But I think random is the logical way to go.
Are you moving that?
And I'm happy to move in that direction.
Thank you, Councillor Von Duddleston. Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Any further discussion? Not. We're voting on random order by surname for the ballot. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you, Mr. Groom. 9.4. Welcome, Ange and Laura.
Thank you, Chair and Morena councillors. As you know, the main purpose of this paper is to seek your approval for the draft annual plan info document. This is included in the paper, as well as some context around how it will be used as part of our wider communications approach prior to and also after adoption of the annual plan. Just one thing of note from your feedback previously, Councillor Nees, you asked for a change in the Te Ara Pōtama. I've incorrectly changed that, but I will change it to what you asked for, which was co-governance forum. So that's noted. Thank you. Otherwise, I'll take the paper as read, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Councillor Nees.
Just about that, I think you have changed the, you've called it a co-governance secretariat, which is fine. Yeah, it was Te Tiriti secretariat previously, so I'm happy with what you've got here. My only comment was we did make a decision on the on-demand trial to extend to April 25, and it reads like we've made a decision to continue the service. So I just wonder whether that needs some slight adjustment.
Councillor Crosby.
Just to note, and thank you for the change of emphasis and annual plan 25-26 at a glance. That first paragraph, I think, sets the scene quite nicely.
Councillor Winters, then McMillan.
Thank you. Laura, yesterday I was listening into the Rotorua Lakes Council adoption of their consultation document. They're pushing a digital platform. Is that the same as our Participate? Because they were raving about best thing since sliced bread, all that sort of stuff. So is it the same?
From what I can tell, that's what we think, but we haven't seen it yet.
Can you just confirm that for me? Come back to me. Cheers.
Any further questions, councillors? So, before Councillor Shirley asks, because it's an annual, councillors, I think it's important that we note that the 3% general rate increase is inclusive of inflation and growth. So essentially, if you take out an inflation and growth, you're at about a zero rates increase in terms of the activity, because I think that's an important communication we have to stress with our communities. Essentially, no rate increase, we've just made an accommodation for inflation and growth.
Happy to move, Mr Chairman.
Happy to move.
Page
Move.
45.
Thank you, councillor Winters, which will receive the draft annual plan communications and approve the draft annual plan information document. Councillor Winters.
Second.
Thank you, councillor Nees. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you, ladies. 9.5, NASA. There you go.
Morena tatou. So this report seeks that the council adopt change 6 to make it operative to the regional policy statement. Concludes a process that commenced back at the beginning of 2021 to implement the requirements of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, remove the hard urban line fence in the Western Bay of Plenty sub-region, and essentially makes it more flexible to be able to allow councils to consider proposals for urban development that are outside or not provided for within our district plans or spatial plans, and to determine whether or not they add significant development capacity. So otherwise, I'm quite happy for the council to take it as read. This is one of the few occasions where decisions for the regional policy statement sit outside the delegation for the Strategy and Policy Committee. And if it is accepted, we have a sign and seal page that we need our CE and the chair to sign today, please. So on that basis, assuming that this is resolved in favour of accepting this, would we just bring that back to you at lunchtime?
Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
It's been a long journey. Well, relatively long journey.
And maybe if I can just foreshadow that many of the councillors will be aware that under the reforms have signalled removing the regional policy statement. Despite that, this is concluding a process to implement in good faith the NPSUD. And so that's news that we only received at the beginning of the week, and that still has to run its process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, just a specific issue relating to that, Chairman. You may recall that there was a private scheme plan change 95 from Western Bay District Council at Pongakawa. And this council gave a very slamming report and recommendation against the approval of that. And it was really like for a satellite village residential development in an area that desperately needs more housing capability. And our prime reason in our submission was that it's not compliant with the smart growth strategy, whereas what we're proposing now would certainly favour that initiative. The significance of it is that the hearing commissioners, I think, are meeting, they've got a fixture in a month or so to actually hear that review. I don't know what the commissioners are going to recommend or decide, but what we're really saying now is our rather harsh mission condemning it isn't now consistent with our policy.
I can't speak for the commissioners who will be deciding on that application, but there is another aspect to their proposal, is that virtually the majority of the land areas, versatile land or highly productive land, which the regional policy statement signals that in rural areas outside defined urban limits or urban growth areas, that versatile land should be prioritised for rural production activities. So that's another consideration that the hearing panel will have to consider.
Councillor Shirley.
I've looked at this pretty closely, and the expert advice is that it's not highly productive land, point one, even though we claimed it was. And then the inconsistency of that is, while smart growth says we can only develop within what's approved by smart growth, everything identified by smart growth, whether it's Tauriko, Te Puke, Mokoroa, or Kainga for that matter, it is all highly productive land. So it's just the inconsistency that gets me.
No further comment.
No comment. So NASA, the status of the current RMA changes that you referred to, they may well alter this at some stage in the future.
Well, what I'm saying is the original recommendation is to remove regional policy statements, so they
Yeah.
won't exist. The current national policy statement, highly productive land, is still being considered for amendments. I can't speak for what will happen with that at this point in time.
Through the chair, perhaps just to add to that, there will need to be an exercise by councils across New Zealand to look at what parts of the regional policy statement you're going to retain and keep in that switch over phase. So while it might not be called a regional policy statement, there's still components of the regional policy statement which will switch over. So that's an exercise that all councils will need to do, whether it's a regional council or district council.
Thank you. Councillor Crosby.
Thanks, Nessa, and thanks, Chair. I can't let this opportunity go by without having a bit of an issue and a whinge about part of it. I accept the process that started in 2020, I think. You know, we have no choice but to do this, and the committee went through its process and did the right thing in presenting now, despite the fact the RPS may disappear. Part of it, I think, you're right in the moot as I read, will go into the planning document, the regional planning document, and part of it might end up in the spatial planning document, which I'm supportive of. My concern is, again, I am also a supporter of national policy statements, but they can become politicised. And I worry about policy UG 25B, which is housing bottom lines, which promotes certain numbers at certain timeframes. For example, Tauranga City is a tier 1, along with Western Bay, and I think Rotorua is tier 2. And you have to have so many, apparently, provide for so many houses at a certain point in time. Whoever will understand what's going to happen in 2052 is beyond me. And so these things are just fantasized and they're made up because the world changes rapidly. With technology, 3D printing houses will be well established by then. How people work, where their employment opportunities are, etc., will all change. And yet these numbers drive the thinking in the TLAs. They certainly drive the thinking in Tauranga City Council at huge expense. And that's the bit that really worries me, housing for housing's sake. What they don't take into account is what type of houses are actually required, nor does smart growth. There's a couple of paragraphs in smart growth, and that's about it, about affordable housing, about the rental stock, about social housing, etc. So these are just what I call paint by numbers housing. And frankly, it's irresponsible, in my view. It's not our fault. We're told to do this by those that know more in Wellington. So I have to have that complaint because I've said it in smart growth and I'll say it again at every opportunity. The manner in which we are planning our housing stock for current and future generations is simply wrong. And now we have potentially, with the best will in the world, a couple of ministers wanting to throw planning rules generally out and put houses wherever you can, because that will bring the affordability down. And there is a component part about supply and demand. I accept that. But there are some fundamentals you cannot ignore. One, the cost of the raw land, the cost of getting infrastructure there, and all the other bits and pieces it takes in the system to get a house on top of it. So this is all relative to this. Fortunately, we'll get another bite at that cherry, no doubt. And I am hopeful that the new RMA planning regime, while it has some similarities to what the previous government were doing, it seems to be a lot more practical, user-friendly on the face of it at this point in time. And I think that's an opportunity to address particularly the needs in the Bay of Plenty, including at Potiki, Kawerau, Whakatane, not just Tauranga, Western Bay and Rotorua, to address this really critical issue. But frankly, I just really have an issue with these housing bottom lines. It's there to serve a political purpose. It does not serve a practical purpose whatsoever.
Councillor Crosby, and I note the point that you said, despite your concerns, which is experience, we have little choice really but to adopt this. Councillor McMillan.
Just happy to move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nees, second.
Yes, thank you.
No further discussion? All those in favour of the recommendation starting on page 53, say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Agenda item 9.6. So councillors, this is starting on page 135 in terms of the text. What we will do is the order of the presentation, we'll deal with the science aspects first. We'll get through the presentation and then we'll deal with questions. That's the point I was getting to. Right?
Through you, Chair, we have a brief presentation from the engineers and then we're followed by comprehensive science presentations for you.
Morena koutou. Thanks for that, Fiona. Introducing Niroy, hopefully everyone knows Niroy Sumaran. So Niroy will do the presentation. I just wanted to make a few points initially. So first of all, just want to acknowledge that Gary Chalmers from WSP is online, and when we have our questions, he can answer any detailed questions around the options and the estimates. I just want to acknowledge that WSP have had quite a short time frame to get things together. It all feels a bit rushed towards the end, and you'll see that in Niroy's presentation where we're not 100% certain on the costs, so we've provided a range essentially. Other things to consider is sheet pole installation and the king pole installation. They're very long in terms of when they go in. They don't go in perfectly each time, so there's some deviations around it, and that's another reason why we can't give it, a more definitive cost, because when we've tried to retrofit things in the past, we've got out onto site and we've had to adjust this and adjust that. The last thing I wanted to point out, of course, is that key date that you would have seen in the report, that the king piles, we're happy that they're going to be okay until 2038, and of course that drives decision times as far as a number of these options are concerned. Hand over to Niroy.
Morena, Chairman, councillors. Tony, I'll get you to, cool, thank you. Cool, so I'm just going to go through the options that were developed since we last caught up in December, and I'm starting with option 2. I take it as the report's been read. Option 2 and 3 form option 1, and as Mark's mentioned, it kind of gives us an indication of how over time we could utilise the two options to form option 1. So option 2 is our retrofit option. It's a medium-term option where we're looking to put PVC or vinyl sheet piles directly to the existing sheet piles and then sandwich them to the king piles to then form the bond around the hole. And that will give us that medium-term solution till that 2038. Option 3 is one of our long-term solutions, and that is essentially stripping the wall down to its king piles, which are our main structural item there. That's the main structural support to the Oha wall. And then we're encasing them in concrete and then fitting fibre reinforced plastic beams to the top and bottom, and then a PVC or vinyl sheet pile. So it's a long-term option. Option 4 is in the same vein. This is a proprietary system provided by Combilock, and the reason we've considered this as one of our options is our community technical panel group have requested us to look into this option. And so they're an interlocking system that can be slotted. Again, you'll have to take everything off the Oha wall to the king piles and slot the items over it, and they can slot together to form the water barrier. So like I was saying before, option 2 and 3 combine to make option 1, and essentially you'll undertake option 2, and then prior to 2038 you would then implement option 3 to form your option 1 option there. And then the full replacement is another option we've looked into, is taking the whole wall out and replacing it with a similar like-for-like structure. Then we looked at option 6 as full removal of the wall. And then there's a short-term option in there as well, which is minor works, 1 to 3 year period there of monitoring the corrosion issue by dive inspections. or boat inspections, and then making decisions from that point. So with that, we've put into a multi-criteria analysis. There was 4 key options that we considered in our analysis. So it's the technical solution around design, complexity of the design, does it stop the water from moving through, and then the risks associated with each option, the durational solution, and then the costing. So as Mark's mentioned, there's a rough range of costs. It's very high level, but what the MCA gives us is an indication of what we think is our preferred option here, which is option 2 and 3. And there is a lot of risk associated with these options, and so therefore we would like to trial these options, as Mark's mentioned. There is some misalignments on how the wall is originally constructed, and so we would like to test it out, and then we can refine the cost from that point forward. I think finance has given us some information as well here around the rates. Anyone from finance?
Mark's just coming up, but yeah, this is one of the things we looked at just for really to provide a bit of a reference point of what the rough order of costs could be. Obviously, the recommendation is for trial only, and that's within budget of the current LTP budgets. So there's no extra rates needed for that. But if we did go for one of the larger capital options in bullet point 3, I asked Mark to model that. I'll let you speak to it, Mark.
So just to highlight, as Chris has mentioned, the capital costs are relatively uncertain for the project, so these figures are to be taken as very preliminary estimates. There's significant work to do on the costing and determining the composition of our OPEX, CAPEX for those costs. So to give a broad indication, those larger 50 million capital works, if we were to fund that as normal over 20 years of life, we're talking about a 9% one-off general rates increase across the whole region. There are other options that could be considered, which may require amendment to a revenue and financing policy, such as looking at funding it through a smaller area like the Rotorua Lakes Council District, or properties more immediately around Rotorua. And we don't have an existing catchment base for that, so we've used the Rotorua Lakes Sewerage Scheme rating base for Rotorua as an indicative option. So these are very early estimates to give you some idea of where this could be heading. Of course, the solution could be more or less than the cost there, but you can use those on a ratio basis to give a broad estimate.
Right, finished, Neroy? So I think at the risk of it getting detracted, this is in 2 components. So the issue you've put in front of us, Neroy, is this is an engineering solution to what problem?
So this is an engineering solution to preventing water flow through the wall, but also if the wall was required to be kept for a long duration of time, say 50 years.
So I'll be a bit more clinical. This is an engineering solution to the holes in the wall.
Yes.
Right. The rationale to justify any CapEx, whether it's new or whether it's interim, long-term, has to be made on the basis of the causation of the water quality in Rotorua. We have yet to hear from the science in terms of the rationale for that. So this is merely an engineering solution to the fact that the wall's leaking. And we shouldn't look at this as being a solution without understanding what problem we're trying to solve.
That's
that fair comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair comment, and we'll vacate the table. And
Just so we can do it in segments, we've got Councillor Thurston's got a question, and then Councillor McMillan. It's about engineering.
I may drift. I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer, and I rely heavily on your advice and your professional expertise to formulate my own personal view. the chairman has said that we've got to focus solely on the engineering solution that's being put to us today. And I know that we're looking at a medium-term solution to 2038, has been stated as part of the presentation. Hopefully you don't cut me off, Chairman, but my focus is on our commitment we made as politicians, and I direct this more to my colleagues rather than to the staff. We made a commitment to the community out there as an expression of goodwill that we would harness the expertise that exists in the community to be party to the proposed solutions that staff were going to bring down to us. So my concern is that maybe they've been bypassed, maybe they're going to be accounted to in the cost and community impact of solutions that will require full consultation. But I can share with you, and it's no surprise, that there's a level of dismay in the community out there that we made this gesture, not necessarily staff, but we politicians did, to some pretty high profile experienced academics with engineering experience who have got, dare I say, and I hate the expression, skin in the game, that they would be utilised. But I know they were called to a meeting last Thursday to be briefed on the potential solutions. But I don't think that really was reflecting the goodwill that we had expressed earlier on, with them being meaningfully engaged. So I reserve further comments to later in the discussion, Chairman, but that's the point I'd like to make on behalf of my constituents and on behalf of the people at Lake Rotoiti who believe that they have got a valuable contribution to be made, but they weren't afforded that opportunity appropriately. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. And what I'll do is, at the appropriate time, I'll get the Chief Executive to answer those concerns you expressed about involvement of the working group. Councillor McMillan, is it about engineering?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to ascertain why with the trials you've not split out trialling option 2 and 3, you've lumped them together. Is it because it's minimal extra cost to trial them both at the same time? In other words, you haven't given us the option to trial option 2, but not trial option 3. You've kind of tended to pull them together both in the slideshow and in the report. I'm just talking about trial, by the way.
Yeah,
that's all I'm talking about.
No, that's okay. Thanks. So really, at the moment, we want to define kind of what was required to do those activities, right? And yeah, there's some efficiencies if you have a contractor to do one piece of trial, then to bring them into trial both options. But in saying that, that option 3, the longer term option, to try and trial it, there's a bit more work involved in it, and heavy equipment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So if we were to do a trial, it would start with that trial option 2.
Okay. Evaluate that.
Evaluate that, but we don't want to then be in a position to only have like a desktop study done on a piece of paper. We would like to really test it out, but it still has to go through a process and see if it's able to actually do a really conclusive trial or something like that.
Okay, so it would be a staged trial. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, I think stage 2 will be option 2 will be a lot easier to trial, so you'll probably do it up front.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nees.
Thank you. My question's about option 3, the concrete encased king piles. They'll be encased right down to the lake bed.
Yeah, so at the moment, and if we need some more details, Gary could probably explain that a bit better, but we've only basically, you'd use a sleeve, you lower the sleeve maybe only half a metre or a metre below, enough so that you're not running the risk of the concrete coming up through the bottom. But that hasn't been well defined yet, but you wouldn't go all the way down to the lake bed, it'll be quite shallow.
So we heard that there is some pitting of the king piles, but is that largely confined to that area that you're looking at a smaller amount of casing?
Yeah, so from the dive inspections that have been undertaken, when they've cleared material around half a metre below the sediment level, the steel is relatively clean. It looks, I think the words that our dive inspectors used, it was almost like new, half a metre below. So that gives us an indication of how low we would probably target, plus a little bit more.
So the microbial action only works on the top 2 metres, say, or 1.5 metres of the king piles, is that right?
It's pretty much where there's active water flow. From what we understand, is where there's active water flow.
Councillor Crosby?
Similar question. In terms of the proposals of recladding, was that also to go to what depth? Because we sort of had it in our head, it was going to go all the way potentially to the lake floor, but with the quality of the current sheet piling from the lake floor upwards, does that require complete recladding through to a survival rate of 2038 or beyond?
So, sorry, just to clarify, we're talking about that option 2, the sandwiching option. Yeah, so essentially those panels that we're sandwiching to the existing sheet piles are only around 2.4 metres long, and that's based on where we believe we've got solid steel at the surface, and then enough steel so if it does deteriorate over that time up until 2038, there's still enough steel to bite to keep that panel in place.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Shirley?
Thank you, Chairman. It's really an expansion of, I think, what you did answer, but was concerning me the state of the king piles in the ground. As I understand, they go down some 50 metres, which is phenomenal depth, really, through some very interesting geothermal-derived geology layers. You said that you've tested them, I think, was it down to 1 metre or half a metre below bed level, and it's near new steel. But are you satisfied that there's not, or could there potentially be serious corrosion, given some of the geology down there, at a greater depth?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so when I clarify what the steel looks like, we haven't tested, but we've exposed the steel below a surface of about half a metre, and that still looks pretty good. This is kind of associated with the risk that we're seeing at this point in time. And so there is always going to be a bit of uncertainty here, and that's why we'd like to spend a bit of time to be able to develop and look at those trial options.
Maybe just to add to that, so it's impossible to know what's down, because we only looked down, that half metre plus below bed level. So can't answer that question.
Therefore, you can't assume with great certainty that they are in sound condition for the full 50 metres.
No, it's just an assumption that they are.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
That leads to the question, do you have any concerns about the structural integrity of the king piles through to 38?
Based on all the information we have, we're confident that we'll get them through to 2038.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Neroy. Councillor Winters.
Just a question, trialling option 2 and 3. I mean, we've seen some trials on the existing wall now. Apparently, we've got 1.7 million in the LTP budget for this for 2 years. But I'm not sure how wide is a trial? Is it a 10-metre gap? Because that will tell me nothing. In terms of a trial, how do we know what success looks like? And how wide is this trial going to be? Because this is news to us today, Mr. Chairman, in terms of these. I've seen the pictures for the first time today, and I'm disappointed that the TAG group haven't seen any of these details either. So I'm a bit frustrated that this is coming to us today, and it should have been sorted out with our TAG group in terms of options going forward.
Okay, thank you.
How wide's the trial? How long's the trial?
Okay.
How do we know what success looks like?
Thanks, Councillor Winters. Similar to the response I gave to Councillor Thurston, I'll ask the Chief Executive to address those concerns at the conclusion of the science presentation. Happy, Neroy? Thank you. Right. I'd like to welcome James Dear, so he's with our science team here. We've got Professor Dennis. Welcome, Dennis, and we've got Andy Brea. So are you leading this? I see on my notes say you're summing up, Andy.
I will introduce things too, Mr. Chairman, and you've summed up pretty well why we're presenting the science information in the lead-in today. But you can see that any of those options are going to be quite a high cost. And so it's important that we give you the opportunity to look at what science we have available to show the need and help decisions go through the process of selecting different options and understanding the need for the wall. And also the community out there is very concerned about the quality of some bays of the lake from time to time, and have made comments at meetings and directly to us that the wall is having an impact right now and has had for some time since the wall started forming. And so we also wanted to go through what evidence we have to understand whether that is being caused by what's going on in Lake Rotoiti independently, or whether the holes in the wall are causing in that. So we've got Dennis Osconduct is going to talk about the science information and modelling that we have already, and also what may be available in the near future as we do the review of Plan Change 10 science. And our environmental scientist, James Deere, is going to present on evidence around cyanobacteria monitoring, which we do in Lakes Rotorua and Rotoiti, amongst other lakes within our program. So I'll hand to Dennis, and he's got a presentation in front of you there to go through. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to present some of our science to this group. And today I'll be sort of reiterating a few points that I've made previously to you about assessing the Awa Channel diversion wall with regards to the water quality impacts on Lake Rotoiti. So I've split my talk into two small parts. I wanted to run you through some of the scenario simulations with our model that we conducted as part of the 7-year review a couple of years ago. And I also wanted to comment on future prospects for water quality changes under climate change, and some of the response times for water quality improvements in Lake Rotorua, with regards or relative to some of the scenarios that I'll be describing. So I just wanted to remind everybody that as part of the 7-year review, we also conducted a thorough data analysis of the available water quality data, and we conclusively found that the diversion wall had a significant positive effect on water quality in Lake Rotoiti, and that impact has perpetuated to this date. Don't want to sort of show those graphs again, but I just wanted to reiterate that point for today, which is also reflected in the long-term trophic level index data that the Regional Council holds, really. So I'm showing here the blue points are the trophic level index, which is an aggregation of those 4 key water quality parameters that are responsible for the way we perceive water quality, including algae blooms. And after the wall was constructed, we see that the TLI has substantially improved, even with a couple of years meeting the TLI target at 3.5. But since then, the values have been sort of slightly above the target, around 3.7 to 3.9, and steadily holding at that level. So with regards to the modeling work that we did, I'm summarizing a pretty comprehensive technical report here in one slide, and please forgive me if I have to glance over some of the assumptions and nuances that might be needed to fully interpret these scenario results. I wanted to draw your attention to what we're calling the baseline scenario at the top, which is the wall-in scenario, where we are feeding the model for Lake Rotoiti with the water quality that we find in Lake Rotorua, which at the time of the modeling work was sitting at an average of 4.27, which is very close to its target. And with the wall in place, we modeled that the TLI in Roto Iti was at an average of 3.93, which is pretty much or very close to its measured TLI, which confirmed our conclusions from the data analysis, but also confirmed that the model can actually integrate the function of the wall adequately. And then we ran through a series of what-if scenarios where to guide some of this discussion, but also for us to understand what would happen to Lake Roto Iti if we took the wall out. I'm not suggesting that any of those what-if scenarios have any certainty of coming true. We're just exploring those options within the model. And we were interested in understanding what would happen if we pulled out the wall tomorrow, basically. So we're still feeding the lake model with the current water quality in Lake Rotorua. And what we found was a minor deterioration of water quality in Lake Roto Iti to an average TLI of 3.96. So you see that the changes are very subtle to the second decimal place, which is why the box is a pastel orange and not a bright red in terms of degradation. There's two key important bits of information that we can draw from this. If we pulled out the wall, then Lake Roto Iti water quality would be vulnerable to changes in the water quality in Lake Rotorua. This is really important to remind ourselves of that, because that's the reason why the wall was put in place in the first place. The second important bit of information from this is that because the water quality in Lake Rotorua has improved significantly since the time when the wall was put in place, there's no reason for us to assume that there are any acute effects of the holes in the wall on current water quality in Lake Roto Iti. I hope that makes sense. So if we pulled out the wall altogether, there's subtle degradation in Roto Iti. The holes obviously impact on that effectiveness of the wall, but there's no reason for us to assume that there are any acute effects of those holes at the moment. The bottom two scenarios in that graph, in that slide, represent a what-if scenario if we improved water quality in Lake Rotorua to the point where we might see an improvement in Lake Roto Iti water quality. So in the first scenario where the Roto Iti Rotorua water quality looks green, we're driving down the TLI in that lake to a maximum of 4.2. So that's meeting the target every time, with occasionally being appreciably below that target. And that would result in a steady or consistent water quality with what we're seeing now with the wall in place. The major conclusion from that is if we manage Lake Rotorua to a maximum TLI 4.2, that would be the equivalent of having the wall in place at the moment. And the bottom scenario that you're seeing here was an exploration to see at what point would Lake Roto Iti water quality actually improve. And for that scenario, we had to draw down the maximum TLI of Lake Rotorua down to 3.8. And we're not suggesting in any way that this is a realistic water quality target for Lake Rotorua at this point. I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about the future prospects, in particular with regards to Lake Rotorua. Given that the discussion at the time was around, we asked the question about how long the wall would be needed for, and at which point we wanted to understand the long-term trajectory of water quality in Lake Rotorua. There's quite a few uncertainties around this, which is why we want to implement a more sophisticated modeling approach for the next round of the Plan Change 10 review, which is due in 2027. But there's several aspects that we know about in terms of the general direction of changes. There are legacy nutrients in the catchment within the lake that will sustain nutrient inputs into the lake for probably decades to come. That's just an accumulation of nutrients within the catchment soils and in the lake sediments that is a result of a period of land use intensification in the catchment. Most of us and councillors would be very well aware of the hydrological and residence time constraints within the catchment, where groundwater lag times are in the order of 30 to 120 years in some of those catchments. which means that we will expect an increased nitrogen load to come, reflecting a period of that land use intensification in the 1960s. So we're still expecting that nitrogen load to come through over the next few decades. Climate change and extreme drivers like weather extremes, for example, Cyclone Gabrielle in 2023 will have an effect on lake water quality. We know from previous work and work in other lakes, including some of the lakes in the Te Arawa Lakes area, that climate change impacts directly on lake water quality would be equivalent to an increase in nutrient load. So we would likely see an increase in TLI values under climate change scenarios. We don't have any firm numbers on what that would look like in Lake Rotorua at the moment, except for some work that was done nearly 15 years ago, which is slightly outdated by now. Wanted to comment on incomplete or ineffective management actions that might result in disappointment in terms of not being able to reduce nutrient loads to the extent that we need to reduce the loads to meet our in-lake water quality targets, and that will be impacted by climate change as well. So there will be considerations in the modeling work that we have planned to account for climate change effects in the catchment and what that would mean for current mitigation packages that are being implemented. So coming to my conclusions already, so just wanted to reiterate that Lake Rotorua Iti water quality is closely linked to whatever happens in Lake Rotorua under no wall scenarios, which is pretty intuitive and very clear. Achieving water quality improvements in Lake Rotorua Iti will require what we've, based on the scenarios, enhanced water quality in Lake Rotorua, ideally to a maximum TLI of 4.2 in Lake Rotorua itself. Just sort of a few speculative conclusions there about climate change effects that we think will intensify existing water quality issues in Lake Rotorua. And we need to be looking at legacy nutrient loads and groundwater lakes times to understand the interaction between those delays and climate change over decadal processes. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm handing over to James, I think. Yeah.
We just have one more presentation here that Tōna will bring up for James. While it's coming up, perhaps I should just introduce, I think we've got Don Atkinson in the background, as well as Grant Wallace, Grant Wallace is one of our community technical panel members.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, councillors. My name is James Deere, so I'm an environmental scientist here at Bay of Plenty Regional Council. I'm in charge of a number of water quality monitoring programs, including the cyanobacteria monitoring program. Today, I'm going to give you a very short overview of the impact of cyanobacteria blooms in Lake Rotorua on Lake Rotorua Iti. So I was asked to investigate this question. So are cyanobacteria blooms that we observe in Okawa Bay caused by the blooms that we see in Lake Rotorua? So just as a bit of background, when we talk about cyanobacteria blooms, we're talking about toxic algae blooms. So when the lake turns green and we have issues with human health and human health warnings go out. So we have a cyanobacteria monitoring program that covers 13 sites across 4 different lakes. Every week between October and the end of May, we have an algal monitoring technician, Anna Rayburn, who goes out and collects samples from each of these individual sites. And then she brings them back to our lab downstairs and analyzes them with a microscope, looking at all the individual species that make up those samples. We have 3 sites that are of particular relevance to this investigation. So we have Lake Rotorua at the Ohau Channel. So that is collected right at the mouth of the Ohau Channel, right at the mouth of Lake Rotorua, just before the water heads through the Ohau Channel. we have Lake Rotorua Iti at Okawa Bay, and we also have Lake Rotorua Iti at Te Weta Bay. So when we analyze this information, we get what is called a biovolume. So that's the volume of cyanobacteria cells that are present in the water. And what might we expect if if a bloom on Lake Rotorua was affecting Lake Rotorua Iti? Well, we might see something like this. So we have Ohau Channel and we have the biovolume, and you can see that these two little pulses of bars represent two different algal blooms. And then what we might expect is that in Okawa Bay, that we might have a similar sort of pattern, that pattern is replicated in Okawa Bay. However, there might be a little bit of a lag time, and then it is further propagated through to further down the lake through to Te Weta Bay. So when I talk about a lag time, you can see this by these lines that are drawn up there. So that the peak of the bloom might be offset a little bit because it's unlikely, there's likely to be a little bit of travel time involved. So what do we actually observe? Here we have information from 3 different seasons. So you can see at the very top, I apologize, the text is a little bit small there, but at the very top in the pink bars, that is the Ohau Channel site. In the middle, we have Okawa Bay, and in the blue at the bottom, we have Te Weta Bay. So the first thing that you can see is that Okawa Bay and Ohau Channel tend to be quite independent in terms of the blooms. We're not getting this replication of a pattern sort of moving through as we originally thought might occur. What you can see in the bottom too, if you look at Okawa Bay and Te Weta Bay, that you're actually getting quite good alignments. The values are very small in Te Weta Bay, but when there's a bloom in Okawa Bay, you're quite often getting a bloom in Te Weta Bay as well. Also worth noting that the y-axis on this particular case for each of those different seasons is very different, and that's because in 2002 and 2003 we had an extremely intense bloom that you can see via the line that's sticking right up the top, and that has if we were to put them all on the same scale, you wouldn't be able to see anything else. So that's the reason for that. So one way of analyzing this information is to look at a correlation between these different sites. So in this particular case, when you look at a correlation, you're looking at 2 different variables. And if you're getting a strong relationship between the 2 different variables, you would expect those observations to line up like we're seeing in the very top left-hand corner there. If you're getting no correlation, then you might expect something like you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. There is a Pearson coefficient, which is a statistical metric that you can use to calculate how well the correlation is fitting. And so you get, for a perfect positive correlation, the Pearson coefficient would be 1. For a perfect negative correlation, the Pearson coefficient would be -1. If there's no correlation whatsoever, then the Pearson coefficient would be 0. So rather than showing you all of these individual plots, trying to compare these individual sites and also different lag times, what you can actually do is create something called a correlogram. And what it does is essentially for each one of those individual figures, it's just taking that Pearson coefficient and color coding it, whether it's positive or negative. So in terms of positive, it's red. In terms of negative, it's blue. If there's no correlation whatsoever, it's gray. So what do the results actually look like? This is what we can see. So on the left-hand side, we have Ohau Channel and Okawa Bay. On the right-hand side, we have Okawa Bay and Te Weta Bay. And in the middle at the bottom, we have the Ohau Channel and Te Weta Bay. So the first thing that we can see here is you can see via the gray line with a whole lot of zeros in it across the bottom that we have no correlation between biovolumes in the Ohau Channel and Okawa Bay for both an immediate correlation and also the Ohau Channel plus the results that we're getting in Okawa Bay a week on, and 2 weeks on, 3 weeks on, and 4 weeks on. So they're the different columns that you can see up the top. So this is just taking into account the lag times. you look on the right-hand side, you can see that there's an immediate correlation between Okawa Bay and Te Wete Bay. So that value is about 0.8, which is a very strong correlation. So if there's a bloom in Okawa Bay, there's a bloom in Te Wete Bay, as we saw before. And that gets weaker as you look at Te Wete Bay a week on and 2 weeks on. At the very bottom, you can see Ohau Channel and Te Wete Bay, and there is a very weak positive correlation between there. However, the highest number we have there is 0.3, which is extremely weak. So I wouldn't be basing any strong conclusions based on that. Okay, so we can look at biovolume, but we can also look at species composition. So as I mentioned before, the ANA is analyzing all of the species that are within each sample. And there's an analysis called non-dimensional scaling. And what it actually does is squash all of those individual species down into a couple of axes. And the important thing to take away is that if you've got two different sites and they sit over the top of each other like this, then you can conclude that your populations are quite similar. However, if you end up with something like this, where you've got quite a distinction between the two, you can conclude that your populations are actually quite distinct. So what does this actually look like? In terms of Ohau Channel and Okawa Bay, we can see in terms of the species composition that they're actually quite distinct, and this is statistically significant. So what does this mean? It means that it's unlikely that blooms from Lake Rotorua are actually the same population of species that we're seeing in Okawa Bay. So what does it look like in terms of Okawa Bay and Te Wete Bay? So obviously those two sites are on the same lake. Well, we're seeing that these species actually overlap quite well, and that there's no significant difference in between those two sites. So we could conclude that those sites actually have overlapping cyanobacteria populations, and it's likely that those blooms are related. So just very shortly, in terms of a summary and conclusions, firstly, that there's no evidence that cyanobacteria blooms in Okawa Bay or Te Wete Bay are actually caused by blooms in Lake Rotorua, i.e. they're not being seeded from blooms in Lake Rotorua. And this is based on that there's very little correlation between biovolumes and that they have distinct cyanobacteria communities, and also that Okawa Bay and Te Wete Bay are most likely related, and that's based on the biovolume and also the community composition. So I will pass on to Andy. So just a summary slide.
Thanks, James. And just a final slide we're into now is the summary points from both of those presentations. One of the key points here, I think, is that the evidence doesn't support any particular urgency around getting into fixing the wall. And so that gives us time to think about what's the impact, what are the costs, and refining those costs in a better way. It's really important to remember that in 2004 and 2005, Rotorua had a TLI of 5. In the past 12 years, it's had a TLI of somewhere between 4.1 and 4.4, a really significant improvement in water quality. And Professor Oskar showed that in one of his early graphs. The wall is still providing a function, although the holes in the wall, of course, will get larger with corrosion. The modelling shows if Rotorua, so this is Dennis's work, the modelling shows that if Rotorua doesn't exceed a 4.2 TLI, so the resource plan target, and we have alum dosing, the wall doesn't benefit Lake Rotoiti. It's weird, it's doing its own thing. It's important to remember the repair options are coming through any options coming through at a high cost. And as Neroy pointed out, there's a high level of uncertainty around those costs. So trialling and refining those costs is necessary. We will certainly continue ongoing monitoring to ensure structural integrity. And Mark Townsend pointed out that 2038 is a key deadline in terms of ensuring the king piles are repaired. We have plan and working through now with defining the terms of reference for the 2027 PC10 science review. And so this will include modelling that can inform how the catchment interventions for Lake Rotorua are progressing, any other disruptions, of course, to water quality, as well as, importantly, the climate change that Professor Oskondaksha mentioned. And then the final point, the wall has always been considered as a temporary structure, as the asset management plan assumes that it will be removed at some time. So that's our end of our presentation and the summary of the points that I think we presented. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So, councillors, you can see the differentiation between the engineering thing which we spoke and the science that should underpin any good decision. So we're going to have a lot of interest in this. Dennis, could I just raise a couple of issues or a couple of questions with you in terms of your presentation? You raised the issue of climate change. And I think it's important that we understand climate change in relation to what I will call climate variability, which may cover a period of 10 years, cycles of different climate versus climate change. Do you have a horizon in terms of what you talk about in terms of long-term climate change? That's the first question. The other one you raised in terms of improvement in Rotorua is the incomplete actions. Are you prepared to give us an opinion on the currently, I think we're at about 50 tonne of nitrogen, 50 to 50 tonne of nitrogen that we've got to buy out of the Rotorua catchment. Would that be a statistically significant amount that we would take out then on the basis of the NNP, that it would improve the TLI, given there's a whole lot of other issues playing out, such as water temperature and that, what I call climate variability?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in terms of the climate change horizon, we're generally looking at projections all the way up to the end of the century. That would be probably the endpoint of our model capabilities at the moment. And there's a whole lot of things that will happen between now and the end of the century that we aim to capture with the modeling work. And with regards to your second question, I don't think I feel confident at this stage, without going back to some of the specifics coming out of the last Plan Change 10 review, to comment on statistical significance. And also I appreciate that some of the numbers that I have in my mind are probably outdated by now. I don't know if Andy has more up-to-date numbers on that, if I understood your question correctly. I'm not sure.
Andy might be able to help you, but essentially in terms of the buying back nitrogen out of Lake Rotorua, we have to get 100 tonne. We're currently at 45, so we've got 55 tonne we've yet to buy out before 2032. If we were able to achieve that nitrogen load reduction, would that make a difference to the expected TLI?
Right. Yeah. So thanks for clarifying that question. The short answer is yes, based on all of the work that has happened around determining those numbers, that we will see the improvement in the TLI value.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Shirley, then Councillor Nees, Councillor Winters to follow. McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. The first one is probably to you, James, and that's, do we have historical data from when the lake was at a TLI of 5 and was cyanobacto blooms? Do we have a comparison then between the species types in Rotorua versus Rotoiti to match with the situation today? Because that would indicate whether it was because of or instead of the war. That's sort of the first question. The second question was, I'm struggling with the comments, and that's that water qualities improve significantly. That's the measured, observed, scientific fact, that the trend has been a significant improvement, which is terrific. We all agree with that. But then to compare that with the comments, Professor, whether your comments, your projected hypothetical projection was because of legacy nutrient levels and climate change that will inhibit and delay future Lake Rotorua water quality improvements. And it's really an extension of the chairman's question. I just can't reconcile those. The trend has been significant improvement because of actions taken, presumably. If we actually apply those actions consistently and even improve our actions, surely that would mean that the trend of improvement continues. There are two questions there. I just like clarification. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Shirley. Short answer, yes, we do have information going back that far. No, it wasn't included in this investigation because I was asked to look at the information over the past few seasons. We could provide that type of analysis. However, data prior to about 2010, when the blooms, when the quality of Lake Rotorua was particularly poor, is not as good quality as the information that we have now. So I could have a look at it. I could produce something. There may be some caveats about it.
Thank you, Councillor. So the significant improvement in water quality is what it is, and we expect that the intervention package that is being implemented as part of Plan Change 10 will further contribute to an improvement in water quality. During that implementation time, and further beyond that, we know that climate change will counteract the effectiveness of those measures. That's the point that we don't quite fully understand when we might see that deviation from that effectiveness and where climate change will significantly counteract those improvements, which is what we're trying to find out in the next couple of years. Does that answer your question at all with regards to climate change?
Except that climate change isn't new. It's been in forever, we've had climate change. And are you talking about projected accelerated climate change impacts?
It's a good way to look at that. So we expect until the middle of the century, which is not too far away, that the impacts of climate change will be comparably minor to what we are going to expect towards the second half of the century. So there will be accelerated impact of climate change on those ecosystems.
Beyond 2038?
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I apologise. I won't be pronouncing your surname. So if you don't mind, I'll call you Professor Dennis. Thank you for your advice on the science. I was shocked to see how quickly those holes in the wall developed, and a number of us went out, and they're sort of like so big now. And I guess we would expect that that level of degradation would continue. Could it potentially even speed up if the holes are bigger?
Sorry, if you don't mind, I'd ask Amy to answer that.
Yeah, I think I probably could defer that to me. That's probably something for the engineers, but there has been 3 yearly investigations. So there's an understanding of how quickly those walls have developed. And I think the proposal 2 that Leroy spoke about is putting the patch sheets down to 2.4 metres depth. And so those sheets would contain the flow at least until 2038, until the king pile work was done. Was there anything you could add to that, Leroy?
The monitoring that we've been doing showed the initial corrosion rate, and that's dropped off slightly as we move through. So in direct answer to your question, no, we're not expecting it to accelerate.
So we're expecting that the holes will stay the same size?
They'll still get bigger, but not at that same initial pace as
right. But they sort of doubled at least in a year, in my memory. Would that be right? And there's certainly an awful lot more there on all.
So I guess the process is that the steel will thin, and so it's thinning and thinning and thinning. And so that's when I talk about that rate of corrosion, is that they'll thin and thin and thin. They'll get to a point where they're so thin that they start to break off, and that's, you'll start to see those holes get bigger and bigger.
So that's a precursor to my question to Professor Dennis. So what you showed us was last year's TLI data based on the size the holes were then, and there would have been and I've seen some pictures of, you could see the pulses of the water coming through the holes. So have you done any predictive sensitivity analysis? If those holes continue to get bigger, what might that do? You've said at the moment, based on what you've seen, this is the case. Say, for example, the volume of water coming through from the Ohau Channel increase substantially. What would you expect to see?
Thanks for the question. So we did initially consider that sort of sensitivity analysis that you mentioned. We opted to not do it for a couple of reasons. Because the main reason is that in the scenario simulation where we pull out the wall altogether, the impact on Lake Roto Iti water quality was very minor in terms of the way Lake Rotorua would drive that water quality in Lake Roto Iti. If we wanted to do a sensitivity analysis of an increase in the holes, that would be still fall well within the margin of error that we actually see in the models, so the conclusions wouldn't be very valid, which is why we didn't do that specifically. But extending the conclusions that we've drawn from a scenario where we pull out the wall altogether, we're confident in saying that even with, I'm not suggesting any specific years, but right now and maybe for another couple of years, we don't see an immediate acute risk of measurable water quality impacts of Lake Roto Iti through those holes.
Okay, so just another question perhaps to you, Andy. We are getting a lot of feedback from the community around Lake Roto Iti, who are very concerned and want fast action and would like the wall reconstituted like tomorrow. Should we delay and should we decide to trial for another couple of years, and in the interim the water quality in Lake Roto Iti continues to cause difficulty and we have blooms or we have record of decreasing water quality, would alum dosing of Lake Roto Iti be a solution to deal with that water quality? And if so, what would be the cost?
Oh, what I'd say to start with, thank you, Councillor, is we have the results of modelling with the water quality as it is now. And I think we've got to go, this is the best science that we can get. And so we have to have confidence to trust that, or else we've got the wrong people doing the science. So at the moment, I would advise that we should follow that science. And then going forward, in terms of the effect of alum dosing, it's probably the alum dosing on Lake Rotorua which has made such a big difference to Lake Rotorua. So the important thing is to ensure that we continue to do that alum dosing. And one of the questions for the Plan Change 10 science review, which is within the next 18 months to 2 years, is to go, well, what's the position on that alum dosing, and should we increase that alum dosing or continue along at the rate that we are? And then my comment on alum dosing in Roto Iti is I would say it's probably unlikely to be a useful thing to do for a couple of reasons. I don't think you would get a lot of support from the community or iwi to go into alum dosing in Roto Iti. And if the problem's coming from Lake Rotorua, then we should address the problem in Lake Rotorua. And if the wall's still having an impact in terms of reducing the effect of Rotorua, then perhaps there's something going on in Roto Iti. And we're having at the moment, that situation, for example, with Okawa Bay, through the work that James has presented.
So the question too is, there's limited water circulation in Okawa Bay. There is circulation, but it is sort of semi-enclosed. Wood alum dosing in Okawa Bay, I don't know how alum dosing works. If you put it in one little area where the water doesn't move a huge amount, is it likely to have a immediate impact on that area, or would it be mitigated and spread through the rest of the lake?
So I think, Councillor Nees, the short answer to that is you're right. You need to understand what alum dosing does. Alum dosing locks up P. So what we have to then, science has to establish what is the causation of those blooms in Okawa Bay, and I would be very surprised if it was P.
Oh, if you want an answer to that, I'll defer to that to Professor Voskondakia.
Was going to be my next question.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So it's a number of factors, obviously, and it's not quite as easy as saying it's just P. Nitrogen limitation does play a role in Lake Rotoiti, and that's been established for many years. And we've no reason to assume that has changed, even with the wall in place. In fact, we looked into that as part of the work as the 7-year review, and there are still periods of nitrogen limitation in Lake Rotoiti. So we have to look at that very carefully before we start looking just P. And then additionally to that, there are also interactions with the weed harvesting in the bay, where we might see nutrient releases or the degradation of that organic matter contributing to some of the nutrient dynamics in Okawa Bay. So it's not quite an easy answer to give you today.
But temperature has an impact too, doesn't it?
Correct, and we know that Okawa Bay is notoriously warmer than the rest of the lake because it's so shallow, and it warms up quite quickly during the summer period.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nees. Councillor Winters.
Oh, Dennis, hi. In the weekend at the Lakes Water Quality Society AGM, you mentioned the impacts of climate change and legacy, and you said that it would probably add a 0.2 TLI to Lake Rotorua going forward. Even when we do all that we're going to do in terms of the integrated framework for Plan Change 10, if we get that all done, climate change is still going to add 0.2. Can you confirm that figure?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Winters. Today I deliberately stayed away from actually putting that number on record. There's a couple, so I want to comment on why. So that work was done nearly 15 years ago, and that's okay. I wanted to highlight that was based on a set of assumptions that were valid at the time, where we didn't include the alum dosing in the modeling work, and we didn't include some of the mitigation work that has since then been implemented. However, all other things being equal, during the time when we did the modeling, the outcome was that climate change would be about equivalent to an increase in TLI of 0.2 units. So I'm happy to confirm that, but with the caveat that that was based on the set of assumptions that we had to make at the time. So does that answer your question, or was there a second part to that question?
Yeah, it does too. It tells me that we're not out of the woods yet in terms of resolving Lake Rotorua water quality problems. We've still got a long way to go. And yes, the wall is a patch. It was always designed to be a patch for Lake Rotoiti. You know, when we put it in, it was going to be for 50 years, and then we're going to pull it out because we'd done all the catchment work in Lake Rotorua. So, you know, we're not out of the woods yet in terms of our catchment work in Lake Rotorua.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make an initial comment there, please? Just so that you're aware, that's part of the Plan Change 10 science review will allow us to put that through the model again and get more up to date. So just make sure that people are clear that there is a sort of an end point to that, so that information will come through in that review. Thank you.
Councillor McMillan.
Oh, thank you. I've got a few questions. The first one should be a yes or no, very quick. Climate change will impact all of the lake water quality, not just Lake Rotorua, am I right?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. And So my next question is, do you think it would be significant to patch up the wall with, say, option 2, and if option 2 didn't work, option 3 until 2038? Would that be of value, of significant value to do that to 2038?
I think, Councillor McMillan, that's probably a bit unfair in terms of question. Dennis is a scientist. He's put the science in front of you. To ask him to contribute towards the appropriateness of an engineering solution is a bit unfair. I mean, that ultimately rests with us. You've heard the evidence?
Yeah, yeah. I know what I'm thinking, but fair enough, fair enough. I'm pushing you too far, but I had one last question. Do you think land use change around Lake Rotoiti would have an impact on those 2 pockets of algal blooms that we're seeing in Lake Rotoiti? In other words, retirement of intensive land use, intensive agriculture.
Yeah, thanks. We haven't explored explicitly those opportunities for those land use changes and
Sorry, there's just some whispering. There
you go, Dennis.
Thank you.
Yes, so thanks for the question. So I don't know. We haven't done any thorough analysis on what the opportunities would be for land use change in those areas, and then we haven't done any calculations on understanding what the contribution to the nutrient loads are. So
yeah, but potentially, my question is, what's occurring around the immediate vicinity of Lake Rotoiti itself, never mind what's coming from Lake Rotorua, needs some analysis, whether it's impacting those algal blooms.
I think that could be a very useful exercise.
Thank you.
Councillor Crosby.
A very similar question, really. The frustration with the residents is generally around the algal bloom and the general health of the lake. So what causes those algal blooms, particularly at Okawa and Te Weta?
Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, it's not a simple answer. There's a whole set of environmental conditions that need to align quite well for those algae blooms to occur. And obviously that happens more recently, quite frequently in those areas. If we knew the answer to that, we probably wouldn't have an algae bloom problem in our hands in those areas. I'm sorry, I don't really have a straightforward answer, but it's a combination of temperature, nutrient availability, and weather conditions, in particular calm conditions that still the water that enables those species to flourish.
Okay, we need to move on. So Fiona, I want you to address the issues that Councillor Winters and Thurston have raised in terms of consultation or involvement.
And also, Councillor Winters, the trial is currently scoped as a 10-metre wide trial, which would be 3 bays wide for each of the options, which was another one of your questions. So on the 11th of December, Council heard from members of the TAG and the Lakes Water Quality Society. They presented to Council. Key points made were that they suggested the wall would not last for another 10 to 15 years, as indicated, and that the king piles should be replaced and the wall repaired now. They also sought that the repair work to commence no later than December 2025, sorry. They also said if there is no commitment being made by Bay of Plenty Regional Council in this matter by June 2025, the Society would seek an enforcement order through the Environment Court. Staff also presented at that meeting on repair progress and the water quality impacts. Following that, Council directed staff to expedite the presentation of options for the Ohau wall to Council, and that is what's happened today. I met with Lakes Water Quality Society representatives with the Rotorua constituency councillors before the Council meeting, and my hope then was that WSP staff and the TAG would work together to provide advice to Council on the most appropriate options to address water quality issues in the Ohau wall management. Given the presentation that Lakes Water Quality Society and TAG provided in December, and also the need to expedite these options, it was not possible to get that combined advice from the TAG, WSP and staff. Hence why there are options in front of you today from WSP and staff. I want to acknowledge that the WSP work was not available for the TAG meeting last week in the detail that you've had today, and also that there are TAG members, and particularly Grant Wallace, who's provided some key questions that he would like answered in terms of the TAG work. I also want to acknowledge just how complex the science and engineering solutions are here for this matter. So our council has, I think, in front of them options they can consider now, or they can take more time with it in terms of what Councillor Thurston was suggesting in terms of seeking further engagement, particularly with the TAG, Tangata Whenua, and report back to council at a later date, given that this had to be expedited following the presentation of the TAG and Lakes Water Quality Society in December to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Mr. Thurston.
I think we will be proposing a pause, and I know my colleague Councillor Winters will speak to that in greater detail. But my question is to you, Chairman. We have 5 recommendations before us today, and when we come to discuss those, I would like you to give consideration to accepting a further one that agrees to ongoing input from the Community Technical Panel / Technical Advisory Group as we move forward. But I do fully support a pause and that we harness this expertise and generosity that's been extended by the community out there, and they're incredibly knowledgeable individuals, let's be honest. And I think there's huge benefit and kudos for us to go down that path. So I know I can now defer to my council colleague to put some meat on the bones with regards to pause.
Mr. Winters.
Was there another recommendation that you put forward, Fiona? Just that we defer the decision today?
So I think, taking on board Councillor Thurston's comments, there are some components of the resolution 1 to 5 that you can adopt.
Yep.
But the Chief Executive, after your submissions to the Chief Executive outside the context of this meeting, has put on the table around a resolution that will essentially obviate some of the other comments you've got here.
Correct. So I'm happy to move 1 and 2.
Thank you.
We defer, we don't vote on 3. We note 4, the results of the trial. No, we don't need 4. But we put on the table that we delay the decision of until August 2025, and we have the TAG, Tangata Whenua and staff come back to us with a report for August 2025, and that this is incredibly complex, Mr. Chairman, and so I'm speaking to it now. What you've heard today is the science and the engineering solutions, and there's a whole lot of new information today that's been given to us, and I can't get my head around it in an hour. And I don't think it's fair on my colleagues to expect you to get your heads around this in an hour. So, hence the new bit in red. We delay this decision. We allow the TAG and the Tangata Whenua and staff, WSP, to report back to council by August 2025. That's it. Number 3, 1, 2 and 3. I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman.
Moving, Mr. Winters.
Yep.
Second, Councillor Thurston. Any further discussion? Right, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, team, both engineering and science. I mean, this has been well worth discussion. It's absolutely necessary we get clarity around some of these positions. So thank you very much. Councillors, we're going to adjourn till 11:20. I'm not even running to my own time frame, but that's fine. This discussion was worth having. So I've deferred the Quayside holdings, which will now commence at 11:20. So we've got 15 minutes, team. Right, thanks, councillors. We'll reconvene. So welcome, Mark. Lyndon, sorry for the delay to you and your team, but we had a really important issue we had to resolve. So we've got two items. We've got the additional statement of expectations for the coming year, and we've got the half-yearly report, inclusive of the Toi Minor. So I'll put it in your hands, how you want to handle that. Do you want to read the report first, or do you want to speak to the statement of expectations?
I think we'll do the report first. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present our results. Obviously, we've got the three of us from Quayside here, plus we also have two online, Kieran, our director, and David A, our CFO, and they'll both be presenting part of the presentation today. Four topic areas we'll cover: the interim results, the investment portfolio performance, statement of intent, and strategic asset allocation. But I would like to start with sort of the key messages or executive summary. And so these are the key takeouts of the slides that we will provide the proof points and evidence of. The first one is that we've had a really good first half, but as you'll be aware, we're going into some very volatile, choppy waters around the world at the moment. And that is making us a little bit cautious in terms of the full year. The second one is we're really focused on increasing the transparency around our investment performance. And we'll show our first cut of the portfolio allocation and how that can help us understand volatility and its impact, smoothing, and what we may need to do to give consistency of dividend to the council. Its impact on any choices we make around special dividends, capital withdrawals, and so forth. It just makes the whole thing very transparent, and that will tie into work stream 4, which I'll come on to. But under number 3, our collaborative stakeholder engagement continues, whether that's mana whenua, wider iwi, council, our investment partners. It's something that Quayside is really working on, and it's paying huge dividends. And our fourth key point of today really is around there are a number of work streams still in play as we bring our strategy, our simplified strategy to life, which is all about protecting and growing our intergenerational fund. And some of those are around the SIPO, the distribution policy, our tax engagement with council, our treasury policy, our organisational design. So we've got many things still in flow as we refine our strategy to deliver ongoing results. So the first part really is that going forward, we will present our business under 3 portfolio areas. Each have distinctive management requirements and each have distinctive traits. So the first one is we will talk about the port, which still makes up roughly 80% of our portfolio. It's had a strong first half and you'll see the results shortly. The second one is the investment portfolio. This is where we start to de-risk our concentration in the port. And the third area of our focus is around the strategic assets, in particular Rangiora Business Park. And we will now talk to each of those under the overall Quayside position.
Right, but first of all, I'll just cover the interim results. So these are for the 6 months ended 31st of December 24. They don't include the port consolidation and they are unaudited. So positive performance for that period. The port dividend was ahead of budget and the portfolio performed positively. The that was somewhat offset by the overhang. So you'll remember that the overhang there of $10.5 million is the accounting treatment of the FinCo on Rangiruru. So that FinCo may well be recovered sometime in the future as others start to develop land, but for now it's written off for accounting purposes. There was a slight increase in operating expenses, but overall the net profit after tax was up on last year, 40 million as opposed to 30 million. After adjusting for the one-off items of the overhang and adding back the one-off PGF funding of 1.8 million, the normalised net profit was 48.8, which was substantially higher than last year.
Nikoto, yeah, just moving a bit on the outlook for the year for us. We do expect a full year net normalized net profit after tax of around $73 million with a range of 70 to 75. As we spoke before, this is driven maybe by good performance on the first half of the year, but the expected softer performance in the second half of the year for the portfolio, mainly driven by geopolitical condition uncertainty and our USD exposure. In terms of payout ratio, we do expect 2025 to be our peaking year and to sit around 96%, with 2026 showing signs of improvement, maybe driven by increasing port dividend and reduction in the PPS dividend starting from next June. Just moving quickly to the next slides, and this needs to be read in the context of Mark's introduction of really starting to be clear on those three different buckets. We are starting to present the balance sheet and the net assets specifically in terms of composition in those three different buckets. As we mentioned, the port is still obviously the biggest part of our portfolio. The second part that is probably really relevant to this transparency exercise is a cost to serve exercise that we are actually undergoing at the moment in order to increase transparency and show the resource intensity of these three different buckets. As you may see from these slides, this exercise is still ongoing, but out of the 7 million operational costs on an annualized basis, we do allocate around 2.7 million to the port. For transparency, these not only include the cost associated to specific port management, but also cost associated to PPS, which have seen an increase during the year. Also driven by cost of compliance with CRD, for example. Portfolio investment cost is sitting at 0.6% of the net assets that we manage at the moment, and this will be key in the future to represent key set performance of that side of the portfolio, while 1.6 million is allocated to the Ringuru Business Park. Just probably open to questions on the financial side, maybe before we dig into the port and the details.
Did you go back?
Oh, thank you, Davide. Kia ora koutou.
Did you have a question, Jay? Councillor Ness?
Just in discussions that we'd had previously, you were saying that you're actually having to eat into your investments or you thought you might be eating into your investments to service out and the PPS dividend requirements. Given this return, that's not the case for this year?
That is correct. And with the rollover of the PPS next year, we are definitely looking at a lower interest rate environment as well. So to Davide's point, we believe the peak is now very much either in front of us or slightly behind us in that respect. Just around that cost to serve, it is a really important piece of work. I do recall Councillor Thompson at the last meeting wanting to get a breakdown of how our costs are proportioned. It is something we will present at every interim and every year end now. So council and the public have complete visibility of around how our costs are apportioned across those three different portfolios. For the port one, that sits at 0.1. What we have noticed there is with the emergence of the climate change disclosure requirement, we have seen an uplift in our costs to meet those NZX listed requirements. So yeah, that's something we're keeping a very close eye on, and that will come into any sort of future conversation that we may need to have around the future of the perpetual preference share. In respect to the Port of Tauranga, it's not often you get to talk about double-digit percentage growth with headline numbers for such an established company such as the Port of Tauranga, but clearly a very strong first half performance. I do need to stress that it is against a very weak last year 6-month performance, but nonetheless certainly beyond where analysts thought and probably ourselves thought where the trading performance was at. So that strong performance was largely driven by increase in trade volumes and also unit or pricing increases. We think there is the potential for more pricing increases back on what the Port of Auckland announced 12 months ago. So we are starting to see that flow through, but we still think there's more scope. Furthermore, there was some corporate activity in late February with the Port of Tauranga announcing that it's contributing 40 million into a consortium that comprises the Northern Regional Council, Ngāpuhi Investment Fund and Tupu Tonu to take the Marsden Maritime Holdings private via a scheme of arrangement. So the Port of Tauranga already has 50% in the North Port operations. This is the adjacent land made up of farming and industrial port assets. So the strategic rationale that was articulated, alignment of interest to improve growth and development, simplified ownership structure, and more control to drive growth opportunities. That scheme of arrangement is still conditional on Northern Regional Council public consultation, High Court approval and shareholder approvals as well. We thought it was worthwhile just reflecting over the last 2 years, because we have clearly seen quite a bit of movement in the Port of Tauranga share price. What we have seen is clearly the market has responded to the strong performance over the last 6 to 12 months. And given how the I guess global and domestic economic conditions are, this has been a real positive. On the back of the last results, we've certainly upgraded our view on where those long-term forecasts are anticipated alongside the analysts. So a very positive guidance on FY25 and beyond. And we do expect this to flow through to total shareholder returns. And what I mean by total shareholder returns, that's the dividend component, but also the movement between movement and share price as well.
Questions on the port? Any questions on the port?
Any part I on the port?
Councillor Shirley.
I had one. I was very interested in your comments about the Marsden Holdings Limited. When you say because of the interest that Quayside obviously has indirectly through the 80% ownership of Ports of Tauranga, but when you say taking private, you really mean the delisting from the NZX. And I think I heard you say that it was delivered more control and driving growth. They were the reasons for that. Was that? Did I hear that right?
That's correct. That was the rationale provided by Regional Council as well as the Port of Tauranga.
So that was the best strategic option for you, or for them?
For them.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could just add to that, having been a customer of that particular port, the the potential for misalignment between the port's objectives and the land owner's objectives makes it very frustrating. And I think it's a very, very clever move to put those under common control, common objective. That will drive economic growth, I have no doubt. Having been a recipient on the split behaviour, which forces you to put a shed, in our case, in my past role, quite a way back from the port, very, very suboptimal. So I think what they're doing is spot on.
Have they essentially bought out Ports of Auckland's interest then? Is that, yeah, right.
Lyndon, the consultation ends this week, I think, doesn't it?
Month, yeah.
It's very close.
Yeah, it is. I think it was a very tight consultation period of 31 days, I think, if I recall.
So the scheme of arrangement is what they call it, can only be completed after the consultation period has been concluded.
Okay. In terms of the investment portfolio, as you've seen there, it was a really good result in the first 6 months. The net asset value of the portfolio growing from 426 million to 450 over the period. That was largely driven by both New Zealand equities, global equities, and our fixed income portfolio. They did the majority of the work at 8.6%, 8.5% and 7% respectively. That is above our sort of benchmark of what we would sort of allocate based on the statement of intent. So things are tracking well. In terms of the drivers of that, if I'm going to speak broadly, there was a lot of bullishness around AI and Trump being elected at the start of that the first half. That's been unwound a little bit as we've seen tariffs and trade war come into play, but it's still been a really good result. The private equity from a managed perspective, that is always really quiet this time of year. If you can imagine those managers, they're not having their accounts audited and things like that. So as they go through and get close to the end of the year, we get a better look at what the value of that is. And you'll see I've just made a point there around the direct investments have had a really strong performance, but that is a equity accounted asset. So it's just the retained earnings within that business. So that may or may not, that's not fair value. And that'll change depending on what that business does in the future. Similarly, Toi Moana, it's obviously a more defensive portfolio, but still got the benefits of that upside and what the markets have done. It's tracking in line with the stated objectives of maintaining capital and making its 5% distributions. The distribution has occurred or it's been approved outside of the period. So that number you're looking at there is a little bit out of date, but it's all tracking in line with where we expected it to be. Any questions? And I guess I'd note that the SIPO for the Toi Moana Trust is due to be reviewed this year. We'll work with council and management on making sure that's fit for purpose moving forward. What we're just showing here is that whilst that portfolio is configured to be able to preserve capital and make those distributions, it isn't configured to make inflation adjust that capital. But that'll be something that we work through in the future. Any questions on the portfolios?
Councillor McMillan.
Very broad question, but is there a way you can mitigate the risk with the geopolitical environment? Like, are there safeguards that you put in to, have multiple things that some won't be impacted, or like, have you had to shift your thinking quite a lot?
It's something we're considering. Obviously, the global equity has a large US bias. We are reasonably well protected because we don't have some of the constituents of the market that were really impacted, like NVIDIA, which has come down significantly. We didn't have that, so that hurt us as that went really well. But as it's come back, we've been insulated from it. There are a couple of the stocks in that portfolio, like your Google and Microsoft and those things, that still have relatively high valuations from a price to earnings multiple perspective. But the other constituents we're relatively comfortable with. based on valuation and where they kind of sit in the market. But it is something we're always focused on. We are going through the process at the moment of looking at our distribution and hedging and liquidity policy with an external advisor. One of the things that has come up in that, which we haven't actioned, and I'm speaking out loud here, which could be dangerous, is do you potentially use derivatives to hedge downside in terms of put options on the market, given it is highly priced and there is volatility there? But we're thinking about it, but we haven't actioned it yet. But there are mechanisms. Yeah.
I think, Mark, the smart money would have been buying gold 2 years ago.
Yeah. And just to talk a little bit about the SIPO review, I know we have talked about it a few times with our Project Kwaka presentations, but that at the back end of the year was in principally approved by the Quayside Board. The review has been completed by the independent advisor. We are working with your own executive around that. And as I stated before, there is a secondary bit of work that is also happening around liquidity and distribution policies and how debt is used within the portfolio, because there are things that obviously impact the broader group. What that SIPO review at a high level did, it reviewed the asset allocation and modelled that for the probability of achieving dividends. That was done, and that modelling and what you saw during the Project Kwaka presentations was what the SIPO is now. So the probability of achieving those distributions is can be achieved in a status quo, but also in a sell down environment. It looked at benchmarks, both at sub-asset classes to make sure they were appropriate, and it looked at the overall asset allocation. And what it also did, which you'll see when we talk about the SOI, it introduced the concept of a reference portfolio. And what that is if you think about it, is it's a total portfolio benchmark that gives council comfort that we are doing better than a very passive strategy, and it's aimed to show how much value we are actually creating for council. Any questions on that?
Move on.
We just thought we thought we'd provide a quick update on one of our investments we undertook 2 years ago, 18 months ago, Panorama Towers. So you may have seen in the press the announcement of our first cornerstone tenant, being with Dr. Mark Freundhofer, a local urologist. So we feel this is, firstly, we have articulated this in the past, this will be a template for how we do invest going forward, partnering up with the likes of Craig Watts, the construction company of Watson Hughes, and Sir Paul Adams from Caris. So a third. We know that there is a car parking shortage, so there's 200 car parks coming to market in the next 12 months. I know Tauranga City Council is quite excited by that. And then in terms of the 6 floors or 7 floors of office, having a cornerstone tenant so heavily involved in the medical fraternity does really, firstly, delivers real regional benefit. And we know there's a hospital bed shortage inside our region. But the other is also from a value uplift perspective, having health practitioners in a building like that certainly we think will positively impact the overall valuation of Panorama as well. In respect to the statement of intent, I'm just picking up on your earlier comments, Chair. Are you comfortable for us to talk through this as part of the presentation? No problems. So look, we firstly welcome the draft, the second draft statement of expectation from council. Again, I think these are the sort of things that provide us real clarity as we embark on FY25 and beyond. What we have done there, we're in our final draft, is we are introducing some new concepts. Some of those we've spoken to as part of the SIPO review, provide a bit of an update on where we're at in terms of the distribution policy and the treasury policy. they're like a three-legged stool. Those three need to be very aligned and in unison. So three very important policy reviews that are well and truly underway at the moment with independent experts right across those. The interconnection between, and we've highlighted again the portfolio, the buckets that we call them, being the Port of Tauranga, the investment portfolio, and our strategic asset being Rangiuru Business Park and Tauriko, and just how they have a very different risk versus reward style of outcomes, and how we manage that at a QHL level. So that's something that we talk to as well. We've introduced the cost to serve to you today. What you'll also see is the introduction of some new benchmarks and how we're bringing our portfolio transparency of our portfolio performance to life as well. Just to round out on the expertise of governors and independent advisors, we have kicked off our divestment committee. We've brought in Mark Averill, the ex-CEO of PwC, as our independent advisor. Mark used to be a corporate finance merger and acquisition expert prior to taking the CEO role on. At our investment committee level, we've introduced Paul Duffy, a property expert, alongside Derek Jansen, who I've spoken to in the past as well. When we also make reference to the transition plan, which is in first draft, and that would be in clearly that still is subject to investment committee and the board of Quayside's final sign-off. Very much designed around increasing transparency back to council and to the public. Happy to take some part on.
If I could just add one point to that, Chair. The whole concept of what we're trying to do at Quayside is that we are your preferred investment advisor, delivering great results, not because you own us, but because you want to work with us. And so our challenge internally is to make sure we've got the transparency, we've got the allocation, we've got everything clear that you can see how we are going. That's our journey. We want to be your investor and advisor, but it's not because you own us, it's because we are your best choice.
Councillor Von Duddleston.
Yeah, I just want to ask about staffing rates. You grew to a substantive organisation, around 25 staff, under the previous policy and previous direction from your governors. Now that has changed and you're de-risking the private equity stuff, is that having an effect on your staffing levels? And where do you see, have you got a strategy around that? I'm not saying, should you drop them tomorrow, but is there a strategy around that?
Yes, there is. I think that's a really important question. Staffing level sits around about 19 FTE at the moment. That has always been reviewed, and we have done some work with our people people culture and safety committee around what our organisation potentially could look like in 3 years. The divestment of our direct investments is still work in progress, so we still have some legacy requirements there, which is still sort of all hands to the pump at the moment. And Rangiuru is by no means sort of beyond us either. So probably, fast forward maybe 2 to 3 years, I think you would see, some potential changes to our organisational structure, not just capacity, but also a different style of capability.
But yeah, the cost to serve is really critical in that, because the behaviour that drives is us to always be like, well, is that person on that seat adding value? Yeah, and if they're not, we have to ask the question about it.
Absolutely. So there's the two parts. One is the cost to serve. So first of all, we're very transparent. And the second one, which is mentioned in the statement of intent, is we have a reference portfolio, which is the passive. You could put the funds into just a passive, one person and a laptop kind of operation that will generate X. Then we have at the other end benchmark portfolio against companies or investment funds that have a similar structure to us. Now, how are we going against the best in class? And yes, we can talk the income side, but then what's your cost to serve to generate that? And so net, what is the best result? That's exactly our pathway. And the skill sets, the capabilities, the competencies and the headcount is all part of that as we migrate forward.
Just moving on to Rangiuru, for those that attended the opening a month or so back, we have to admit it was a great day, and a number of highlights for the team, and I hope, and I genuinely believe for the regional council group as a whole. I think I have mentioned to you once before, I think we'll stand on the interchange at some point and feel awfully proud about what has been achieved, and I've got to admit that was a day that I feel that we have achieved some significant milestones. Just going on to
Councillor Winters.
Lyndon, can I ask a question about the interchange? I believe it cost about 60 million. You've got 16 million from PGF.
18, yep.
18, sorry. Balance, where did that come from?
It came from LGFA.
We borrowed it.
Too.
But this is a national highway. This is State Highway 2. I don't understand why the Crown doesn't fund it in its entirety, because it's a state highway access.
I join you on that view, and we did have Waka Kotahi NZTA regionally committing to the Delta, and that went to the National Board for sign-off, and unfortunately the devastating impact of Cyclone Gabrielle hit us literally at about the same time as the board of NZTA Waka Kotahi was about to approve it. We certainly took the view that we couldn't sort of pause at that juncture.
So you haven't stopped NZ, you haven't, we're not going to stop there in terms of getting NZTA to pay for the whole lot. That's what.
We will continue to lobby. There are some real difficulties around getting funding for something that is now being built.
And it's essentially, it's vested back into NZTA.
Yeah, it is.
As a completed unit.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Councillor Shirley.
On that very point, given that it's an integral part of the Eastern Bypass State Highway 2, and it's now vested back with NZTA, and we ended up paying the lion's share of it, have you considered the option of approaching NZTA to share the toll on that piece of highway, proportionate to the bit that we have given back to them?
That isn't amongst many other different ideas we've tabled as well, councillor. But we'll, yeah. Look, I do accept this as, something that was very difficult to digest. I have to know myself how how fathomable it came to me when I previously was involved in Ruakura, and I know what was undertaken by NZTA on behalf of that particular development, and there was no. That was all picked up by the Crown. So I have no more. Nothing but alignment around your views, councillor.
Sam.
The only thing I'd add is that in the cost of that, which isn't a portion to our bit of land, will be captured by the Finco recovery. So that is the mechanism that it is meant to be recovered as other landholders develop, and they'll pay for their portion of the bridge.
A portion of it, yeah.
I agree.
Okay, where we go?
You need an easement over that.
Yeah. Looking just in some positive news, on Monday we signed our first section sale. That is the orange, quite significant site of 8.5 hectares. So that has now gone unconditional. I won't share who that tenant is, but it certainly, what I can say is it does align with the natural endowments of our region. So it's in that horticultural, agricultural space. There will be processing, cool stores and the likes as well. So look, it'll be a great early announcement for the park. In the light yellow up the top there, we also have two contracts out in the market, one for 5,000 squares and another for a hectare. So once we make these announcements, and I guess we're doing that a little bit today, given it's a public session, we expect the phones to continue to run hot. One point I'll just add, it was also, this transaction price was all inside our valuation range as well. So yeah, a great outcome, and full plaudits to the team for delivering that outcome.
Councillor McMillan.
Oh, I was just going to ask, when will it go live? Presumably there'll be a media release about who that company is. When can we expect that to hit the community?
I don't know exactly the timing. I would expect that within weeks, not months. We are relying a little bit on the
purchaser.
On the purchaser to make those announcements.
Yeah.
It is quite a the industry that they operate in is quite a competitive one. So he's very much designed around getting his timing right in terms of that announcement.
Lyndon, when does the public access open in terms of access of the TEL and the back road?
We're expecting it to be a couple of months away. We are reluctant to open that up too early. Having a park that's got some street lights and some nice new tar seal presents a great opportunity for certain members of our communities with fast cars. So we are trying to avoid having our brand new tar seal becoming something that attracts sort of the boy racer fraternity. So we're delaying that as much as we can.
Okay, Councillor Neese.
Well, thank you. I'm hoping you can provide a little bit more information. I read somewhere in the last couple of weeks that there is a Tangata Whenua group that are developing or seeking to develop quite a large portion of land in Rangiora. I can't remember, it was over 100 hectares, I think, for residential and commercial purposes. How do you know that bit of land? Is it far away from Rangiora, our business park?
It is adjacent to stage 4 and I believe stage 2 as well. So that is it's in its early stages of planning. We have had a level of involvement and we are trying to be as supportive we possibly can. Liz Tiamo is the lead principal on that development. You are right, it is a mixture of, or proposed mixture of residential and commercial. It is a little bit lower lying than the Rangiora Business Park, which may present some sort of geotech and flooding issues, which we've highlighted, but at the same time, we are trying to provide the right level of support to that initiative.
I would imagine if developed, it would provide housing, which is, sort of great for the park. What land use is that land currently in? The
dairy farm.
Done.
So just in summary, the same 4 points. We've had a strong first half, lots of volatility and uncertainty out there at the moment. We'll see where the world lands. The second part is we'll continue to drive simplicity and transparency through our portfolio so that it's easy to understand where the wealth is being created and what are the higher performing asset groups and what aren't. Third one is we continue, and I think this is a strength of management. We continue to absolutely build on that collaborative stakeholder management, whether that's across iwi, council, our business partners and so forth, and that is delivering results. And finally, we've still got a number of work streams. We're still working action on so many fronts as we bring our strategy to life. And ultimately, that's about protecting and growing the intergenerational fund.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lyndon, Sam, Kieran. Much appreciated. Well done. I do note in your presentation, though, but it's an item for further discussion, which is the amount of distribution as a percentage of the total returns. To truly be the endowment fund that we want to, we've got to have that hard discussion about the capital growth.
Absolutely. And I think the distribution policy, when we bring that forward, will be the vehicle because it has the construct around what are the requirements? What is the volatility? How do we smooth it? How do you build intergenerational? How do you meet your requirements? All of these are moving pieces that we have to land collectively.
Okay, thank you.
But
Oh, sorry, we better move that. Councillors, you've got 9.12 and 9.13. Could we have a resolution that we adopt those? Councillor Von Duddleston, Councillor Nees. All those in please say, in our favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Right, councillors, that takes us through to 9.7, 146 Rangataiki Spillway. There you go, Mark, or Chris.
Kia ora koutou. So I'm going to pass on to Neroy to do a bit of a presentation. But before that, I'll just sort of reflect on a few things. So many councillors around this table have been right through this project, which of course started after the 2004 flood event. Consent granted in 2009, and we've been at the construction since 2011-12. Been quite a few challenges on the way. But I guess I just want to acknowledge, first of all, support from this council. And it's been fantastic having you behind us as we've worked our way through those projects. And of course, the community. The community, you have a big driving force. That's not just residents of Edgecombe, that's also the landowners on the floodway as well. Support from iwi, Tūwharetoa and Ngāti Awa. And I'd really want to acknowledge, our staff as well, who have been obviously at the forefront of it all. So Bruce Crabb, who started it all off, and I feel sorry for Bruce. He didn't have a lot of support when it first started, and it's only since the engineering team has really got in behind it that we've moved along. We've lost someone on the way, of course, and our mate Arch Delahunty, who was obviously very integral in those early stages. And just acknowledging Peter Hay, who was a project manager for many years, and of course Neroy, who's helped finish it off. So, for us, it's a celebration, of course, that we've got to this stage now, and we're intending to celebrate with the community on the 10th of May, just as a heads up. So I'll pass it on to Neroy.
Yeah, kia ora again, Chairman, councillors. So I've got a couple of videos here, so hopefully I don't talk too much, but I'll talk while they play. Thank you. Yeah, so as Mark's mentioned, this is the final piece of the floodway project, and this is as of a couple of days ago now, so it's a pretty substantial infrastructure now built, and the purpose of the Rangataiki floodway and the spillway is to alleviate pressure on the Rangataiki River and the Edgecombe community, and it's done by diverting some of the Rangataiki River flood flows into or through our spillway, which is our lower section of Stop Bank, and then down through the floodway to the coast at Thornton. So the spillway upgrade project included a substantial amount of earthworks, paddock contouring over 40,000 cubes of earthworks, deconstructing the stop bank in this location here, which is where our fixed crest weir is. This is our primary structure that allows the river level to flow over, and rebuilding it with engineered fill. The fixed crest weir is concrete. We've got sheep hole guide walls, we've got scour and erosion protection in the form of riprap and Reno mattresses. Boy, that video's lagging a bit. And then as part of the spillway structure as well, we've got 3 contingency radial gates. So in a flood event, if the fixed crest weir doesn't achieve the desired flows, we have adjustability and contingency. And this was really driven home by the community. They really wanted to make sure that we had that contingency in place. And as part of the radial gates, we had to construct hydraulic systems, electrical systems. There's CCTV on site, monitoring systems, safety railing, and security fencing, which is our security fencing and safety railings are our last items to be completed on the site. So yeah, I take it that the report's been read and that we're requesting 860K to complete the project, a shortfall that we've had as we progress the works. Tony, there's another video there. So this is just as we progress the project here. So we started construction in December 2023, and our main earthwork started to occur from January 2024, and that's our paddock contouring and shaping. By the time March 2024 rolled around, we had substantially completed a lot of the bulk earthworks. And what I wanted to point out here is you can kind of see the tan colour of earth where our fixed crest weir structure is. So we ended up having around 6 times the earthwork quantity in the imported engineered fill because of the ground conditions that we encountered as we were constructing and deconstructing the bank. Particularly on this northern end here, as the video moves on, we had a fair bit more fill, probably around $200,000 worth of extra work in this one corner here. Variable soils that we encountered, we wanted to ensure that we had a uniform amount of material in there, and that when we put the concrete structure on there, we weren't going to get variability in the settlement of that structure leading to breakage. So this one here, I just wanted to outline the sheep pole guide walls that were installed have been painted as well. So we enhanced corrosion protection on the site. Beams that were painted. Yeah, I don't think I need to really explain this one, but yeah. So while we're there, yeah, we enhanced the corrosion protection on the site. And then with the radial gates themselves, we had improvements done in terms of machining tolerances, slotting bolt holes, and with the hydraulic system design, we ended up using bigger pipes and a bigger pump, all for ensuring we had smooth operation of the gates and for allowing the gates to go to site and be installed relatively smoothly. So this is us commissioning the gates. They do move quite slowly. This is actually sped up. So, and one of the other things we did with the site itself, the paddock contouring, we contoured it in a way that allowed for cut and carry to be carried out in the future, if that's something that Regional Council will continue to pursue.
I'm just going to jump in and just talk a little bit about the geotechnical investigation, and obviously that's the lion's share of the additional costs. So our practices are in areas where we don't have historic issues or perceived issues, then we'll do general testing. In this particular case, we did a geotech test at one end and a geotech test on the other end, and we design what we need to do based on that. And of course, as we've worked our way through, as Neroy said, we've uncovered some material which is different to what we were expecting. And of course, we have to go through and make sure that we're happy that that material is okay. In this particular case, we decided to remove that material. Now, in areas across the river, now, hopefully where the Rangataiki River, we've done more geotechnical investigations than any other river in New Zealand. So my last count is 28 individual geotechnical reports in known areas or in suspected areas where we've done that geotechnical investigation. So yeah, there's always going to be a case in between, but in the areas that we know about, and we're talking about a whole lot of seepage sites we investigated after 2004, and a whole lot of seepage sites we investigated in 2017, and a whole lot of investigation sites that we've uncovered from other pieces of work has resulted in, as I said, more geotechnical reports in this river than any other river in New Zealand.
So I just wanted to outline that when we did community consultation in April 2023, we're forecasting to construct that project around $5 million more than what we had signalled to the community at that point in time. When we did the consultation, the sentiment from the community was to do it once and do it right, and to get on with it. And overall on the floodway project, we're ending underspent, close to $2 million underspent. So we managed to do what we said we were going to do on that project. We've finished it relatively on time, but overspent. Thank you.
Done. Thank you. So I'll move it. Couple of questions. You're doing an independent review of the capital project. Who's doing it? And the other component of that is Kānoa put in $10.2 million into this project. Are they getting, is that review going to be shared with them? Because we're conscious that their oversight or their interest in terms of the success, not only of this project, but others have contributed to is really high.
So the first one is the review. I don't think we specified that it would be an independent review, but happy to bring someone independent in if that's what's required.
Well, you've got a review noted in here.
Yeah, it just doesn't say independent review, that's all. So I could do it, for instance. So, but if you direct us that you want us to have an independent review, then that's what we'll do.
Well, I just think, given the interest of Kānoa, and it's up to the chief executive, but you've got to be careful you're not the judge and jury.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take that on board. In terms of Kānoa, of course, Kānoa have been kept well informed as we've moved their way through. Certainly, any report that's done, independent review that's done, we'll share that with Kānoa.
Okay.
Kānoa have visited the site and are keen to keep visiting the site because, in terms of an engineering structure, it's quite fabulous, basically. So.
Don't forget to invite Minister Jones to open it, Mr. Shirley.
Having chaired the Rangataiki advisory group, I think it's just worth reporting that the members are very, very pleased with this project. I think would be the overview position. And we should remind ourselves that we're not actually spending our money, we're essentially spending their money. And they are paying 80% of it through the target rate, less, of course, the Kānoa, which is sort of recognised national benefit with the before the deluge funding windfall. But they've asked a lot of hard questions along the way, and I think that they've got to the point where our last meeting they were very pleased and very satisfied. They have funded it through the targeted rate, and they are essentially the beneficiaries. And that that's a very good system on that basis. So from my perspective, with involvement of the advisory group, there is pretty well universal support for the project and how it's been developed and the outcome.
Denise.
Firstly, congratulations for the completion of the work. It's been a long time coming and it's certainly very impressive. And congratulations in bringing it in under the overall budget. But I was reflecting on the number of times that we've had budget requests all the way through the project where the budget has been adjusted, probably just about every time that we considered budgets, there was always, it was going to cost a little bit more. So I was wondering, what were our original estimates way back when we, because I thought it was about 12 million or something. Can you recall what we actually thought right back when we started thinking about it, what it was going to cost?
I think the original cost that came through was about 10 million, and that's when we approached the DIA for a contribution, and what's not reflected in here is we got about a third contribution from them. But as things progressed and we started to do the geotech, and then also the modelling was updated, because the modelling originally was a one-dimensional model and said that we didn't need to do anything upstream, and we always questioned that, and that's why we invested in a two-dimensional model, which basically showed that it definitely needed some work done upstream. And you probably remember in this whole journey is that we looked at other options along the way to can we do some side spilling and so forth, and we had that reviewed and so forth. So yes, I've had the pleasure of presenting to this council on numerous occasions with cap in hand, and as I said, after a bit of scrutiny, and we walked away with the money that we needed to achieve what we needed to achieve. So yes, acknowledge 10 million has turned into 50 million. But when we compare that to 2004, 85 million in damages, 2017, 95 million in damages, and the rule of thumb is that about 10 times of that is really the effect on society. You know, you look back and think $50 million, probably a reasonable spend.
Councillor Von Duddleston, then Campbell.
Just showing my age now, but I remember in 2004 when I first visited there and just after that flood, and there was no breach of the wall in 2004, but it actually went underground and came up as a big fountain about 200 metres out in the paddock, and that's how that's how the water tracked then. Have we done anything to? Is there anything we can do to counter that? Have we done anything? Is it?
That's where these 28 reports come in.
Yes,
So, you know, we've gone through and assessed those, and I know, of course, that you've been involved with the bylaw as well, where we've increased that bylaw applicable authority for just that kind of situation. So that area, the length applying to the bylaw is 200 metres. So as you quite rightly say, it was about 150 metres where the seepage failure occurred in 2004. So yes, we've done a lot of work. We've intercepted a lot of the seepage layers with all sorts of different solutions, and probably 4 or 5 different types of solutions depending on where we are. So short answer to your question is we've done a hell of a lot.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mark, congratulations. I know it's been a little while in the making, but I concur with what Councillor Shirley was saying about the folks in the river forum. Totally backing this. One thing I just want you to talk us through the process when the heavens finally do open up. And it's not if, it's when. So you've got total control of Matahina. Yes.
To an extent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So when the water starts to rise, do you open the radial gates first, or do you wait for the spillage to go and then use the radial gates then?
So the process is when we get the forecast and our model starts to show up, we start lowering the dam. So that's the bit. And obviously we do that in conjunction with Manawa Energy, and we set the, when that needs to occur. When we will make a decision. If it's we're predicting a really big storm, we'll reserve the right to actually open up those radial gates and actually get some flow coming through earlier.
Yeah.
If it's not such a big storm, we may opt not to open the gates and rely on the spillway.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we're monitoring. So we've got a monitoring at the spillway site itself, and then also downstream on the floodway. And if, for instance, we're wanting 100 cumecs to be heading over the spillway, and it says that there's only 80 heading over the spillway, then we can adjust the gates, obviously, to put that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, congratulations. Well done. I hope we never ever use them. Ever. Well, I've seen a lot of big floods in Edgecombe, believe me, and but the good part about it, we have got the community behind us, and the last thing we want is anything like that happen in the last breach. So, but yeah, good on you. Well done.
So, Neroy, a similar question. I've got a couple others from councillors. Is what is the hydraulic capacity in terms of AEP with the radial gates fully deployed and the spillway operating? Have we moved to a 1 in 500 as opposed to 1 in 100, or is it not as simple as that?
So the target operation of it is the 1 in 100 year event.
Yeah.
The modelling that we have done shows that even if you had the gates right open and the spillway flowing at its target flow, there's a diminishing return on the gate operation, but it will still achieve that desired 190 cubic metres or that 1% AEP, and that's what we're designed for. Yep.
Okay.
20% of people. Roughly 20%, yes.
maybe I'll just add to what Nero said. So if we get a massive flow coming down, then what's going to happen? So even after we've done the work with the dam, there's going to be overflowing of stock banks further upstream. So the capacity of the floodway is also a 1%. So if more water comes over the floodway, then it'll go over the stock banks. So, but what should happen first is water will go over the stock banks further upstream before it gets to the floodway in a massive event.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Winters and Shirley.
Can you open those gates remotely, or do you have to be on site?
Do it from my phone right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
that good.
so it's remote, yeah, and plus CCTV.
Yeah. Needed to ask that question. Yep.
Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, 2 points I meant to make before. We've just had the round of all of the advisory groups for the various flood protection schemes with the Rangataiki, the Whakatane. Yesterday was the Waiweka and also the Kaituna. But I think the real appreciation was that we got the lion's share as a regional council of that first tranche of the before the deluge. And that was because we were organised, we had the plans, we had the works ready to go, as I understand it, which is commendable from, what the staff have delivered. And there's actually a second tranche on its way, as I understand. The other point I'd like to make is everyone was expecting in all of the schemes and our staff a massive increase in insurance, because insurance is a big component. And with the global insurance market, particularly this sort of stuff with flooding around the world and fires and that, the expectation was perhaps a 30% increase in insurance. The good news was that I think they went off to London and they came in, I think it was about a 5% increase in insurance. And that was because substantially the reinsurance industry and the industry factors in the risk mitigation. So schemes like this actually reduce the risk, therefore reduce the insurance liability, and the same with the Whakatane wall. So all of that has a positive feedback.
Thank you. Right, I moved it, councillors. You seconded it, Councillor Winters. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 9.8, Mr Haycock, you're here.
Okay, so councillors, through you, Chair, I will take the reports broadly as read and just highlight a couple of salient points. Councillors will be aware that there is a ministerial expectation that public transport authorities will increase the level of private share contribution to public transport costs. Private share is a measure of cost recovery calculated as revenue divided by operating expenditure. This replaces fare box recovery ratio, which public transport focused councillors will recall has been used historically. To deliver on the ministerial expectations, NZTA has been working with staff here to agree some private share targets, and some targets were discussed at an officer level, and those were indicatively agreed at the end of January. NZTA is then requesting that councils endorse the targets by the end of this month, which is what this paper covers today. The process of developing targets has included a lot of analysis in respect to the Bay of Plenty. We started with the forecasts within your long-term plan and then led known initiatives over the top to generate some potential targets. In our case, that is the anticipated outcome of the fares review, which we have developed with the Public Transport Committee and recently endorsed by Council. There are a couple of risks to these forecasts that are highlighted in your reports that I'd like to bring to your attention. The first is that the LTP forecast contains a relatively high level of revenue growth. And that was because at the time the LTP forecast was done, we were coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic and we were seeing significant growth. We have enjoyed a continuation of that significant growth until the last quarter. However, at this early stage, we're unable to tell whether that is a blip or the start of a trend of our growth plateauing. So we would like to acknowledge that as a risk. The other is that councillors that have been involved in the fares review will know that the National Ticketing Solution, NTS, is essential to deliver a number of the initiatives included in our fares review. And therefore, if that project is substantially delayed, then that will hinder our ability to make a significant headway against these targets. So both of these risks are recorded and acknowledged both internally and with NZTA. The final point to make you aware of is what you're endorsing today are targets for year 1 and year 2 and an indicative target for year 3. What NZTA have said is that we will revisit the year 3 target in December of this year, taking into account how we're tracking against the year 2 target. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor McMillan, then Von Duddleston.
Oh, thanks, Ollie. So what you're saying is NZTA have kind of approved these targets that we're looking at today? Because in the table of the risks, it says proposed targets are not agreed with NZTA. So have they now agreed?
So the targets have been discussed at an officer level
Yeah.
and indicatively agreed amongst
Okay.
officers pending
Yeah.
endorsement by council.
Yeah, okay. And just one more point with this, it's on page 161, the employer's discount scheme, which presumably you can't kick that in until we've got the NTS in place. Is that right?
That's correct. What we've acknowledged here is that in addition to the known initiative being the fares review, there are a number of things that staff want to explore over the coming years, which we anticipate will have a positive impact on our private share. We have not included those in our forecast at the moment because the thinking is not sufficiently evolved.
Yeah, I think just to flag really that I think that would be a fantastic opportunity it really sort of falls into that kind of mode shift behaviour change opportunity, and I don't know whether it can be kind of teed up ready to go when the NTS kicks in, or would you need to wait, get that up and running and then explore those, or how does that work?
It's something we're keen to understand more about as NTS gets closer towards delivery and understanding how a scheme could potentially work for us. I'm unable to put any sort of skin on the bones for you today, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora. No, I don't think what I'm going to raise probably fits within the report, but I've got to raise it because it concerns constituents, or my constituents, our constituents, and these are the residents of Matakana. I know it's been an ongoing investigation by council, but I feel we haven't actually resolved the issue of the Matakana residents. And I just want to say that I was at Matakana 2 weekends ago, and it cost me $80 on the barge, a return trip for a vehicle and 2 occupants. If you work out that if that's a charge they have to pay from Monday to Friday, that's $40 for their car owner and 2 passengers. So it's getting beyond ridiculous. And I know we are hamstrung because the ferry is privately owned, but I think that's not a reason to leave the residents in limbo around getting some help insofar as the fares they're having to pay from Matakana to Tauranga, to and fro. I've had a discussion with my friend here, the chair of regional transport, and Andrew as well, the public transport. And I'm told it probably sits with the regional land transport, but I want to table it today because given this report has been done, I want to put it back on the table and I don't want the response coming, well, there's nothing we can do. We have to be able to do something for the residents of Matakana. And I will leave it at that. And I will rely on Lyle and his committee and whatever Andrew can do in his committee. But I am not going to let it lie. I'll just put that on the table right now.
Harry is twisted.
Councillor McDonald, so Oliver's heard the comment, so has the Chair of the Public Transport, so I'll leave it with you two to advance that. Councillor von Duddleston.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm in agreement with this report going, it's a requirement that council do sign this off to go to NZTA. But I do want to, while I agree to the numbers, just recognise where we are in relation to what NZTA were looking for. So we're saying 2024, 25, they were looking for 12%, we've offered them 10. 2025, 26, they were looking for 16%, we're offering 13.4, and 26, 27, they were looking for a 26% private share target, and we're offering 14.4. Now, please recognise that these decisions are made at a board level, not at a senior staff level at NZTA, so there's no certainty around there. My big concern, and I don't like disparaging remarks against staff and transport because they are damn good hard workers, but I am really frustrated that we as a council took the hard decision in December last year on a fares review to try and get this private share. The whole reason behind it was because we know for future funding, if we don't get the private share up, we won't get the funding we need for for all transport, whether it's roads or public transport. And we're told that we can't do it until the national ticketing system comes in. The national ticketing system looks to be over a year behind time now, and I have got no confidence in NZTA being able to even stick to their current timetable, and we're told we can't do, it's not practical to do the fares review until that happens. But I alert you to Auckland, who do an annual fares review of public transport, of their all of their transport actually, and they do it on an annual basis. And just to give you an idea, they increased their fares in 2024 6.2%, 2023 6.5%, 2022 and 21 no increase because of COVID. The year before 3.2, 1.9 and 2.4, and so they've done this on an annual basis, and that's why we are now suddenly having to do this big catch up, and it makes it very unpalatable for our customers to see big hits at any one time. If we could be in that small hits annually, so I don't actually accept that it has to wait for a national ticketing system. I'm really worried that we're going to risk future funding if we don't get this private share up. We made the hard decision to do it, and to have to wait a year for that, which is what we're talking about, from December last year to probably, who knows when it's going to be, November, December this year, plus the review, we did a review of the schools as well, and that has to wait, and everything seems to have to wait. And I implore you, Ollie, to take back to your team the need for urgency, because if we really have to show commitment to the government via NZTA, I don't know which way round that is, that we are serious players in this.
So are you moving the resolution,
I'm
Councillor?
moving the resolution.
Great.
Because we have to. We're obliged to do it. But I really want that message. Yeah, I've told Ollie all this privately, but I want it to be really clear that we actually have to find a way to actually move forward.
Yep, we are. The seconded, councillor Campbell, Ollie.
Just a couple of clarifications through you, Chair. So the two tables in the report, the one with the higher targets, that was some initial numbers that were shared by NZTA for discussion. And they included some relatively high level assumptions around how well we were utilising things like advertising space, so on and so forth. Through the process, we have shared significant evidence and analysis with NZTA, which has allowed us to agree at staff level on the lower targets. So this isn't our proposal back to them. This is effectively what we have got them to agree to. So both ourselves and NZTA are content with the lower targets once we provided the evidence as to what was actually feasible for us to achieve.
Okay, so what's the relevance of the 19th of December?
Sorry, Chair, the 19th of December.
No, 26, 27 targets.
Yes. So, so effectively the 26, 27 target,
Yeah.
the indicated 14.4% will be reviewed in December of this year.
Okay, so that's that fiscal year. Councillor Shirley.
Oh, thank you, Chair. 2 points I was going to make. Firstly, I'd like to totally support Councillor McDonald. It's a very substantial community on Matakana Island, totally isolated. And when you think of the subsidies that are provided through public transport, that is a community that's been totally neglected. And I think it really needs to be looked at seriously. It's been a festering sore for a long time. It creates all sorts of problems, particularly the parking at Oamagaroa Wharf. So it's something that needs addressing, and public transport should link up and service that community. So that was point one. The other one was I was going to comment before Councillor Von Donaldson made his comments, but the national ticketing system, its implementation, I believe, has been an absolute disgrace. It's way over budget. It's spent millions and millions, and it's been years in gestation. Other jurisdictions introduced these schemes within months, but for whatever reason, New Zealand's taken years to do it. It's still not here. It's holding up all public transport all around the country. My question is, have we any confidence that it's coming? How far away is it? And really, it's just inexcusable the way this has consumed tens of millions of dollars and is still not delivered. It's an absolute scandal compared with what other jurisdictions do.
Ollie, quickly, please.
Can I just help here? I met with the chair of the NTS board on Wednesday to convey our frustrations with the delays and to get a very clear picture of when it will be implemented in our region. Our region is ready to go. We need it in terms of these fare increases. We've offered to go first to enable that. We're very good at putting in change processes. As you recall, it did take delays with the regional integrated ticketing system, and so we have all that experience. So there is a meeting tomorrow of the board of the NTS, and we expect to get answers for you shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Neese.
Thank you. I was reflecting that the private share is a factor of not only revenue but operational costs, and also further reflecting on the potential risk of the national ticketing system being delayed, that in fact our ability to manage our operation costs are also hampered by national initiatives. For example, the length of the contracts that we're tied into, the amount of flexibility we have with the PTOM, the operating model. So I just hope that when we have an agreement with NZTA on our private share, that we say that we put it in context, the things that make it difficult for us to make fast adjustments, and to make sure that they understand that the delivery of the national ticketing system will impact on our ability to deliver the private share targets. So I don't know how we can actually get that registered so that it doesn't, if we don't meet those targets, that it doesn't penalise us by way of losing funding because we don't hit them. Have you got a comment on that?
Yes, and through you, Chair, part of the reason that we've seen our targets negotiated to a lower level compared to what was originally suggested is for some of those very reasons. Us demonstrating the fact that all of the factors in public transport are related, and there are some things that even if we wanted to progress them, we physically can't for a period of time. So I hope that gives you some confidence there. The other thing that we've seen is the revision to the year 3 targets at the end of this year. And we see that as NZTA hopefully taking an objective view as to how PTAs are tracking, whether PTAs are doing as much as they possibly can, even if that's not reflected fully in the numbers that are coming through. So we see that as a positive. Just to pick up on another point that Councillor Von Dalson made around fare increases. There are 2 parts to fare changes. There's the pricing level and there's the products that we have. In the fares review that Council has endorsed, we've got both. And the challenge that we have is that there is nothing stopping us from changing pricing levels under the B card. What we can't do is offer some of the new products that we want to introduce as part of our new structure. And that makes it quite challenging for our communities because we'd be putting up fares without offering all of the loyalty benefits that have been endorsed as part of that review. That's something that we can't do until the launch of NTS. And the other one is getting the technology onto our full fleet of school vehicles.
Thank you, Ollie. So council has been moved by Councillor Von Duddle, seconded by Councillor Campbell. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 9.9, delegations. Rachel. Should be pretty straightforward. Moved, Councillor Winters. Seconded, Councillor Thurston. Any comments, further comments, Rachel?
No comments, that's perfect.
Question, Chair.
Councillor Crosby.
Thanks, Rachel. I don't see any reporting mechanism here on what is quite a substantial delegation on some quite big projects. Will we be informed of any decisions through ops and monitoring, more than likely? If not, we should be. That could be in the resolution as well.
Can we add that to the resolution?
Yes.
Reporting mechanism?
So we'd just add in a further recommendation that reports on fast track approvals will go to Operations and Monitoring Committee.
Okay, with that, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. 910. Pest management. Welcome, Lisa. Welcome, Greg.
Kia ora koutou. Just to give you a bit of background of why we're here today with this report, in December 2023, we reported to Council of some emerging pest issues, including some fairly high-profile pests being Corbicula and Callirpa. So under the Biosecurity Act, there's a number of steps and delegations to progress changes to the Regional Pest Management Plan. We're doing that through a partial review. So last year, we took out some changes for submission between August and September. We got 28 submissions and we reported back to Council in December on the consultation undertaken. Today, we're presenting to you staff recommendations on how we respond to those submissions.
Good afternoon, councillors. Just here supporting Lisa, really. The Callirpa and Corbicula issues, which we've talked about with you recently, also raised the opportunity to also update the plan to reflect some of the operational issues that we're facing, namely around wallabies, the discovery of additional species, and things like turtles becoming more prominent in concerns from the community, and also just exploring the removal of the wilding status around some conifer species to enable all trees of those particular species to be referred to as pests rather than just the wilding form. So so as Lisa said, the Corbicula and Calliope provide us the opportunity to review the plan and some of the other stuff that were causing a few operational difficulties.
Thank you, councillor Winters.
Greg, thanks for that. Lisa, thanks for that. I thought we had this sorted for wallabies, and then we find out we've got two different sorts of wallabies in terms of Dama and Palmer, and you think, goodness gracious, we had to go down that line of specifying which wallaby, and we've got that sorted. So we're talking about turtles now. I'm assuming it's all turtles. Well, I don't want to go into a species naming turtle that we're going to be sustained control pests. Is that correct? It's all turtles.
All introduced turtles. Yeah, we don't want to be mean to the native ones. The list we've included, we've said including, and that's just to realise that some other species might come onto the market as pets.
Those will be included, those new.
All introduced turtles will be included.
Right. Okay. Do we need to, it is there in the bullet points, but do we need to specify exactly, name them all? No? No? Okay, don't come back in 12 months' time and say, well, you forgot one.
Councillor Shirley.
On that point, I had another question, but there are no non-introduced turtles, are there?
For you, Chair, we do have native turtles. They're all marine turtles. So so green turtle, leatherback, and things like that.
Yeah, sure. My other question was with regard to, as I thought I heard you said that with the wilding pines or the conifers, that all varieties of that species are going to be included as pests. How will that impact on plantation forestry? You know, because you have species like Contortus, Pinus contortus, as farmed in some instances. That could cause some real problems, couldn't it?
Through you, Chair, we have consulted with the forestry industry. The species that we are proposing to be pests in their own right are now considered not to be commercially viable species. And to our knowledge, there are no commercial woodlots of those remaining. There could still be some farm shelter belts where these species still exist. And those trees, particularly Contorta, continue to provide seed sources into our natural systems. So the aim is trying to capture those trees that are providing a seed source and then potentially becoming problematic because of that. So no commercial species have been captured by this change.
Councillor Neese.
Well, thank you. Those conifer species you've just been talking about, so it's the landowner's responsibility to remove those if they're found. I'm just thinking, are there examples of them in arboretums and botanical gardens and parks, etc., that potentially other councils would?
Through you, Chair, the landowner holds the ultimate responsibility. Just noting that for some of those species, there's also the National Wild and Conifer Program, which might support the control of them in some situations. And at the moment, that program funding is really just being focused on that East Taupo, Upper Rangataiki area. So elsewhere, it would be the cost would fall theoretically on the landowner to remove those. And for if we've got specimen trees, for example, in arboreums and things, there's always the option for those landowners to apply for an exemption if they can show that they're going to manage the seed source that comes from them. Yeah.
And then my other question, and by the way, congratulations, this has been a huge amount of work, and thank you for the very thorough report. The turtle issue, it's noted that this only applies to not pest owners that aren't responsible. So people dip into our pest management plan in different ways. And it occurred to me when I was looking at it that there was perhaps one or two places in the plan that mentions that if you're a responsible pest owner or turtle owner, this doesn't apply to you. But how have we ensured that every time we mention that this is a pest, that it doesn't apply if you're a good owner? How have we covered that off?
For you, Chair, the plan will make all exotic turtle, introduced turtles a pest. We will then issue an exemption under the plan to it that will allow people to hold them, assuming that they can comply with certain conditions around the ability to hold them. Yeah, so we'll have specified, that they must be contained, not allowed to wander. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Can we have a resolution? Do we adopt? Councillor Winters? Bond Adelson? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carry. Thank you. 911,
Thank you,
Wilding
Councillor.
Pine contract variation. Welcome, Shane. This is just essentially an extension of the extra money Doc's got, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, councillors. Yeah, this is a really good result for the program. We've been able to obtain additional money, not only internally through the biodiversity program, but the Department of Conservation seems to be able to find additional pots of money, which is a welcome change, considering the financial climate. So this is to future-proof the program. It's to engage a contractor that's locally based, very effective, and allow us to potentially utilise additional funding through the national program if it was to become available.
Councillor Neese.
I'm happy to move, Mr. Chair, but I just wanted a question. Does this contractor use drones?
Helicopter.
Yeah, so currently there are an aerial operator using helicopters, very specialised technique, obviously high risk, so you need to make sure they're using good operators. It's the second operator we've used in this program, and they've proven to be very, very effective.
Right. I'm just commenting because Waikakapu, I think, are having an event coming up with demonstrations of drone use for pest management, and it seems to me that's perhaps a way of the future. I'd be interested to know if you're considering that for use.
Through you, Chair, drones can be very effective, but there's a time and a place for them. Obviously in highly sensitive areas around urban environments, dangerous terrain, etc. With the scale we're dealing with in the wilding space, the technology is not quite there, but in time it could be. There's certainly plenty of talk around swarms of drones pre-programmed to go in, but this is the most effective methods for many of our sites, not all of them, but yeah, we definitely utilise it and believe it's very effective.
Councillor Winters. Oh, you're seconding it? Good, thank you. So it's been moved, Councillor Neese, seconded Councillor Winters. No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carry. Thank you. Thanks, Shane. 9.4, Regional Software Holdings, draft statement of intent and half-yearly report. Agenda documents to your council agenda, councillors. There you go, Kumaran.
Kia ora, Chair and councillors. This report presents to council for consideration and feedback Regional Software Holdings or RSHL's half-yearly report and statement of intent. The half-yearly report essentially highlights some project milestones in relation to RS Next Gen's software platform completion, board approval of the business case for the regional integrated ticketing system, which essentially is talking about transferring the team from Otago Regional Council to RSHL. From an operational perspective, operating revenue is tracking favorably to budget, while expenditures more than budget, and that's due to one-off payments in relation to ongoing recovery on the East Coast following Cyclone Gabrielle, the data emissions platform, and the public transport ticketing program. Other than that, the company is signaling that the rest of operating expenditure is forecast to track close to budget and the cash position favorable compared to budget for the year. In relation to the statement of intent, primary focus for the company for the next 3 years is successful implementation of the Iris NextGen platform. The board is signaling a retiring council director position becoming vacant and recommending that position be filled with an independent director, and that's in response to the increasing scale and complexity of the business. So still keeping the total composition of director numbers to 8, but that of that 8, 3 would be independent directors. Also signaled in the as part of this process is a board run process around the position of the chair, and it's signaling to shareholders that a recommendation for the chair, who is currently a council director, to be a independent director. So those are the key consideration points for the 2 documents for you to consider today.
Thank you, Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thanks, Kamara. I think it's relevant to this paper. On Saturday at the Lakes Water Quality Society, we had a brilliant presentation. Long story short, it had a huge reliance on GIS. So NextGen, Iris NextGen, in terms of our capability to use that tool, will it cover that issue? And I know it's linked to Bob Lass as well, who did the nuts and bolts of it, but will Iris NextGen be capable enough to do what we think we need to do for the future through Regional Software Holdings, which I'm assuming is connected to Iris NextGen development?
I could defer that to Mr. Taylor to perhaps answer the question, perhaps who's closer to the wider scope of the project.
Later it can be fine. You don't have to answer it right now. I know it's a bit of a tricky question, but I think it's a very important question.
Yes, well, I can quickly answer it. And then Iris NextGen has place-based information in it, and we are utilising, and our testers, our GIS people are involved with that. GIS is certainly the way of the future, and so we have a team here that supports other councils, and it is something that we are focused on. Historically, we used to actually share that service with Tauranga City Council, and so it is something that is really an opportunity to look at as a shared service going forward. Iris NextGen does have place-based technology within it.
Thank you. So what I'll do, Kamaran, is I'll take the whole 3-in-1 resolution at the end. So if you want to move on to Bopless.
So councillors, in terms of Bopless's half-yearly report, the company is signalling pretty much on track for all performance targets, non-financial and expenditure revenue also tracking to budget. In relation to the statement of intent, budget's expected to be breaking even for each of the 3 financial years covered in the SOI, and continuing to seek opportunities for efficiency through joint procurement and shared initiatives, and the introduction of a new performance measure around at least 1 new shared service each year and no less than 2 shared services successfully implemented within 3 years. So that's a summary of the 2 documents there for Bopless.
Councillor McMillan.
Just had a question about one of the joint procurement things, and that is the standardised community engagement app. What is that? Do we use that? I wasn't aware that we had an actual app. Sorry, it's on page 350 and it's the 5th bullet point down on the left-hand column.
Councillor, I'll just have to follow up on that in terms of whether it's something that is in place now or something that is an opportunity, and then who is using it.
Thank you.
Anything else, councillors? If not, can we go through to LGFA.
So again, here, councillors, LGFA's half-yearly report and statement of intent. So the half-yearly report highlights a net operating profit of 8.6 million, which is largely in line with historical trends, with last year sitting at around 5.2 million. The company is on track to achieve 18 out of its 19 performance targets, having missed 2 new green, social and sustainable and climate action loans when there were no new borrowers for the period. So that's the only one missed in terms of a performance perspective. As it relates to the draft statement of intent, the company forecasts assume that the two outer years, namely 26, 27, 27, 28, LGFA will commence lending to the water CCOs once the local water done well program is under implementation. The company also signals a high level of uncertainty regarding the amount of and timing of any lending that would be applicable to the water CCOs, which is yet to be established. Net profit for the 25-26 years is anticipated to be 23.5 million, while the company remains cautious around the amount of loans that can be granted, mainly because of the maturity of existing loans over the 3-year SOI period for both LGFA bonds and council and CCO loans totaling around $20 billion. In terms of performance targets, they're very similar to previous SOIs, focus being on sustainability, implementation of local water done well, stakeholder engagement, and meeting the financial targets while monitoring the credit quality of the sector.
McMillan?
Oh, thanks. Just wondered why there wasn't the uptake of those climate action and green social sustainable loans. Do we know whether there's enough awareness of those? Because it seems like, I can't quite remember, but I got the feeling this happened last year as well, but it seems like such a good idea. I just wonder if people aren't really aware of them enough.
The board does have a sustainability committee from which it seeks advice on in relation to sector awareness, and there is an ongoing campaign to increase awareness around that, but it also could be a reflection of council's needs at this point in time as to utilizing those instruments and the eligibility around taking up those instruments during that particular financial year. But there's ongoing work in that space for increasing the opportunities for the sector to take advantage of.
Could their eligibility bands be too narrow potentially, or? I mean, if you think about flood mitigation and, you know, all of the resilience that's needed across all councils, it kind of seems crazy that those loans aren't snapped up and, you know, just a thought.
Yeah. So as we've reviewed those loans, I can't talk on why other councils haven't used them, but the problem for us using them is we operate a centralised treasury function. As soon as we have a separate funding source for, say, River Scheme Works, we then have a separate source of funds, separate interest rate, separate hedging. Yeah, they need to be kept separated. And that makes the cost implications of managing it not pay off for the small saving on interest. So they work well for very large projects, but the need to separate out the costings and the revenues and the interest to project specifics can make it complex for smaller projects.
So Kamaran, given the recent downgrade by Standard & Poor's or the credit rating agencies of 18, I think, councils, as well as a couple of the CCOs, would that inevitably have an effect in terms of the rates being offered through LGFA?
Yes, Chair. So having recent conversations with the LGFA management, their thinking when forecasting the SOIs is looking at the level of debt being taken out by the sector, in addition to the influence that debt profile or quantum of debt will have in response to credit ratings and consequential impact on debt pricing. The company's primary focus when looking at the infrastructure deficit and the quantum of infrastructure investment and therefore borrowings since 2008, which was signaled between 4 to 8 billion versus now, which is 50 billion, and also looking at the impacts of the compliance standards that will potentially further have a significant increase on that infrastructure deficit. The company's primary focus in its planning and forecasting now is around credit quantity in having enough debt supply being able to service the needs of the sector. A consequential impact on that would likely be pricing increases. But to contra that, the company's strategy is also looking at maintaining sufficient profitability to retain enough capital within the business to maintain its own rating at a favorable level, so that will offset any credit downgrades for the additional debt being taken by the sector, while keeping pricing at an acceptable level, possibly with a net increase as opposed to the way the situation is at this point in time with current debt levels, but with a primary objective of being able to supply the sector with the quantity of borrowing that it needs.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, councillors? Councillors, will you note that the last two, so that's local government funding agencies, BOPLAS, the resolution is essentially the same, no comment needed. The one in terms of the software holding is noting that the retiring council or director will be picked up by an independent and the chair will be picked up. So can I have a resolution? We adopt all those as Councillor Crosby, Councillor Nees, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, thank you. 9.17, Mr. Herricks, he's not here. Moved. Moved Councillor Winter, second Councillor Campbell. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. I'll move we go